Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Knights of Last Call. I am Derek Melenda from the Knights of Last Call, welcoming you to another live stream. Welcome, everyone, to Tuesday, April. My God, April 24th already. We have some light jazz going tonight. Bookshelves still looking pretty empty because we are in the middle of a book review series, and we still got probably several hundred to go. So, but I threw some favorites up there just so we can have something to look at in the background. How is everybody doing tonight? I see GM Scott was here, but is off to see the D&D movie, so I hope you enjoy that. Mike T is here. London, Dan, KC, Frostjack, Sam, Ben is in the house. Welcome, Ben. Frostjack, I think I already said that. Oh, Zerverus is here as well. So, welcome everyone to this Tuesday evening stream where we are going to be talking about session prep, and some of my philosophies around session prep, and what are some tactics and strategies that I do. And I think in order to have that conversation, we kind of need to talk about kind of different modes of prep, right? There's like the low prep or no prep concept, and there are certain games that is certainly the case for. And then there's sort of a spectrum of medium prep into what I would call high prep environments. And that typically is going to be, for me, at least in my personal opinion, fantasy 20 based games. So D20 based games, that would be, Pathfinder 2, Dungeons and Dragons, 4th edition, 5th edition, you name it. I tend to find those to be fairly high prep, but there's a caveat to that. There's a catch to that. And we can kind of get into that and talk about that a little bit as we go through the night. So we've got a couple of interesting things going on tonight with the tips. We have two goals tonight. One is our super chat goal, which is $50. And if we get to that, I will spend the horrible time, to edit and release a combat and tactics video for Pathfinder 2, which we've had kind of in the banks, but has been really like a low priority. But hey, if you all want to see it and you show your support with some super chats, we will get that C&T video out here shortly. Additionally, if you enjoy streams like this, now streams like this typically do not perform very well for us. They don't get a lot of views. They don't get us a lot of traction, but we know that some of our loyal viewers really enjoy these sort of generic philosophical streams. So if you want to show your support for that, go ahead and throw us a stream element tip. The link is in the description below, and that is going to help support streams like this. Lastly, sort of a special gift. If someone manages to unseat by the end of the stream the current hype boss, who is Laughing Out Law up here, then at the end of the stream, we'll have a countdown. At the end of the countdown, whoever is the hype boss at the end of the stream will get to decide next Tuesday's topic. And so it's just sort of as a fun little contest or whatever like that. Otherwise, we'll leave it up to the fates as they may be, unless, of course, Laughing Out Law has something to say. But any case, that's kind of what's going on tonight. And, of course, if you're new to our channel, please like and subscribe. Ring the bell so you get notified whenever we go live, which is typically Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7 p.m. Eastern. But we sometimes throw in a Friday night stream or a Sunday night stream. They do happen. And although we haven't done it in a while, we do sometimes post video content as well. Okay, I think that's about it. That's for introductions. No major updates or anything like that. So let's kind of get into it. Let's start talking about some sort of basic concepts around prep. So the first thing, and this kind of came out of a Twitter conversation that was happening. We were having this conversation on the Patreon, which is where all the great conversations start. And it was this idea about prep ratio. So before we get into specific tactics, I kind of want to talk about this as sort of a concept, a general concept of how much prep should you be doing. And I don't know where or how, but someone out there in Twitter said, is it 1-to-1? In other words, for every hour of gameplay time, are you spending 1 hour of prep time? That seems insane to me, but with a asterisk, which is, I think in the beginning part of a game, you are going to spend more prep time, especially if you are playing a D20. type game, a Pathfinder 2, a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Thank you for the super chat, Damien. Encouraging me to get the editing done. Do it before August 22. Yes, before August 22 for sure. Thank you for this. Thank you for the support, Damien. Because whether you are buying a pre-published adventure for one of these game systems or you're creating it, for yourself out of whole cloth, I think there is a lot of work that goes into these, streams or these sessions. Mike T with $5 super chat says, "Combat and tactics is what brought me here originally. I'm all about it." Thank you, Mike T. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think our combat and tactics series is a really great, awesome, fun series. It's just in the future, it'll probably just be a live stream, which is, I think, will be a lot more fun, and we'll be able to interact with people as we do it. So it'll be kind of interesting. But in the beginning part of a D20 game, I am probably going to spend a lot of time prepping. I might spend 10 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours drawing maps or reading an adventure if I if I bought one in advance, maybe making some changes to the encounters. And I might spend like a whole week, but the game isn't running. I'm kind of getting everything prepared. But once, especially if you're doing a fairly linear type game, railroad type game, which a lot of D20 games are, you shouldn't have to do that much prep before a session. In fact, one of the things I guess I would say I like about D20 games is, and this is sort of me, again, probably shilling for the dungeon as a concept, is, D20 games are sort of necessarily complex. They're stat blocks. That alone is fairly complex. Reading a monster's stat block, knowing what it can do, is fairly complex. The treasure can be fairly complex. There might be some GMs out there, I've done it in the past, where you literally just give random treasure. But most of the time, you are going to sort of be feeling out what the group is and what they want. And, you want to put juicy targets out there for them. You want to kind of entice them. And so you're going to put in a lot of time with a D20 game because there's a lot of mechanical complexity to that. Monsters, treasure, magic items, all this stuff. And then you're going to draw this map. And if you're making a dungeon, you're going to put in, a lot of effort there. But what I like about that is that's kind of a fun individualistic time that I can do. And I can put that time in up front. And if you do it right, and this is, again, a sort of a apologistic way of talking about dungeons. Once you put in that time up front, the time that you would use in subsequent sessions is greatly diminished, almost to the point of being nothing. In fact, one of the only things you might do in a dungeon-based game is, sort of ask yourself, well, what did the party accomplish last time? Would that have any short-term immediate effects in the dungeon? Maybe you swap one group of monsters into another area because the party cleared that area out and they want access to that secret room. And so, the group of ogres moves into the room. And you just make one or two changes. It's kind of like a fun little mini game for yourself. And then you're done. And you just leave it go. But the beautiful thing about that design is in a dungeon, you're not going to force players to go everywhere or anywhere, but you put a lot of prep time into making some of these encounters. I believe that too many people make bad Dungeons and Dragons encounters, make really bad Pathfinder 2 encounters. And by that, I mean combat encounters, by just throwing them together. That doesn't mean that you can't use random encounters, but I think a truly random encounter, I think this is true even Pathfinder 2 Adventures. Maybe I'm spoiled because of 4th edition, but I think that combat encounters should be, the game has a lot of mechanical depth for these things, combats. There's a lot of facets about a character that you can improve and use in Pathfinder 2. Your mobility, your defensive ability, your skills, all of these things have combat applications. And that's how you keep these combats interesting and engaged, is you make these kind of complex scenarios with a lot of different moving parts. Jason B, $10.
Jason B,
$10 tip.
$10. Prep is easy. Go to the Paizo store. Pick one of our awesome adventures. Buy it. Read it if you want. At the game,
well,
read it out loud.
Look,
done.
I mean,
just works
the easiest prep in the world is just buying an adventure path, unless you have to rewrite the whole thing, like I did, because it was not up to my standards. In which case, you're like, what are we even doing here? Yeah, Ben, I would say this, even for someone who is a pretty die-hard low prepper, I just use random encounter tables. I completely agree with Ben's assessment here, is that the major set piece encounters of even a dungeon, I think you should prep those. I think you should have an idea of, hey, this is the big evil demon monster that is in the room with the Ruby Phoenix, and that is sort of this big moment that I think is really going to, be happening. And that's prep time, by the way, that will pay off for you big time as a GM, because, especially in Pathfinder 2, 4th edition, 5th edition D&D, these are complex monsters with complex stat blocks. And there's a lot of moving pieces, and you don't want to screw up the encounter because you don't remember how the monster works, or you forget some key critical ability. I've done it several times. I've done it live on this channel, where the party fought a frost worm in Pathfinder 2, and I forgot about half of its abilities, including its death throw, which might have killed somebody. And so these are complex. You should spend the time to sort of invest in them. If anything, like I said, if I have a knock about Pathfinder 2 or other D20 games, it's that I find them to be very hard to do low prep or no prep. And I know that we have some GMs here tonight who probably will say, I can throw stuff together really quickly. But I don't know if the quality's there. I think games like this demand prep. But I think the benefit of doing a dungeon-based design or a site-based design is that you can do that prep well in advance of the game starting. And that can buy you, and if you do it right and you do it smart, I'm not talking about 1 week's worth of play here, or 2 weeks worth of play. I'm talking about buying you maybe a month or 2 months of play. And you can just prep that in advance, have that all locked in. And of course, it's nebulously locked in. Nothing's written in stone, right? Until the PCs actually encounter it in your dungeon. So if you think of a better idea or cooler idea for what should go in room 17 a couple weeks later, and the group has never even gotten close to room 17, you just change it. So I think that's where like D20 is sort of this weird catch-22, right? Because on one hand, you need to put in the time and the effort and the work. But I think you should be doing that ahead of time, because the other option to you is you are basically prepping one session in advance every week. And that, to me, seems like a nightmare, quite frankly, because, number one, you're going to be putting a lot of time and effort, energy into these encounters. Just the week before, this is the week of your session. We are only human. There is going to be a very strong tendency or bias for you as a GM to want to railroad your players onto the lines that are going to lead them to the encounters that you actually designed. Because, if they go off of that and they start wandering through the woods or whatever, number one, you might not necessarily have anything planned. And number two, even if you're kind of throwing away the work that you did do. And then three, if you do pull something out of your ass, again, I think these are, especially Pathfinder 2, or even 4th edition D&D, these are games that really benefit from intelligently, purposely designed combat encounters. That means the monsters that you've chosen, the terrain that you've chosen, the traps or hazards that you've chosen to put into that encounter. I think all of those things matter. And so, I think that playing D20 super low prep is possible, but I don't know if the quality is there. I question if the quality is there. So that's sort of D20. Now, of course, necessarily, and again, this has pros and cons, and my players know this as well. In D20, that means, you gotta, as a player and the GM, you have to have an understanding that we can't really just go anywhere we want. Because the game system, we could, but the game system is not going to be very well designed for that. I personally think this is the case. Because if we go somewhere that the GM doesn't have prepared, we're kind of being rude, right? We know that everyone kind of assumed that we were going to be going into the Lost Temple next week. And so we know that the GM just probably, spent some time getting the Lost Temple ready for the next maybe couple weeks of play. And then if we decide to make a hard right and we instead, decide to go investigate the, criminal underbelly of the city, that session, not only does it mean, okay, the GM's going to be scrambling, they're not going to have anything prepared, but number two, it means we're kind of shitting on what the GM did there. Like, we're all adults here. I hope we all know that this is not real and that, it's not just magically appearing behind the screen. So, I think with D20, you got to kind of, it's a big ship to steer. You need to really signal. It takes a while to make a turn. So you really need to signal to your game master. And as a game master, as part of your prep, you need to be communicating in advance. Players, what do you want to be doing? Where should I be putting my attention? Because as the game master in a D20 game, I think you have to be sort of, ahead of where the puck is headed. But you want to build these kind of, things in advance and then let the players explore them at their leisure. And so again, that to me is where it's like, there's a lot of work in advance. And then once you've done that work, you can kind of just sit back and let it run because the dungeon becomes its own sort of environment, right? Rick, thank you for the tip.
Tip $20.
Keeping the lights on, supporting the stream. Rick, appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you for that, Rick. So yeah, like I think that is kind of one of the nice things about a D20 game in my, because I've look, we'll get to, we got Blades in the Dark right here. We're going to talk about low prep games, but I want to kind of talk about these high prep games first. There's kind of a fun in saying, I have designed this dungeon, I have designed this site, I have designed this location, and now I am just going to sit back and I'm going to just see how everything works out. And I'm not really creating anything on the fly. I did the creating beforehand. Now I'm just reacting. I'm just letting you know you're doing actions in the dungeon, and I am going to react with how this site is going to respond. But I'm not really having to come up with, it's still a fun creative process, I guess, as a GM. But I'm not having to like create anything, ex nihilo, out of nothing. I am just sort of responding with already existing tools and tactics. But again, this is why I like site-based games so much for D20-based games. And also, quite frankly, the whole ecosystem. I mean, everything, even though it's been 50 years, is still fundamentally tied to exploring site-based locations, aka dungeons. Ben, thank you for the tip.
$25. Can't stick around, but my thoughts. If you are running multiple games, prep is important, but really good note-taking is what will sink or save your game.
Completely agree. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I just want to make sure there wasn't any more there. Absolutely. And in fact, we're going to get to that, Ben, as sort of my generic advice. But, I have here a couple notes that I took down, and one of them is just reviewing your notes before you go into a session, and making sure you know what the party is doing and the party knows what the party is doing. And everybody has this very clear, understanding of, this is what the campaign is. This is where we're at currently. This is where we're heading. And that, like you said, comes down to note taking. So one of the things that I want to get back to again about, dungeons or site-based, Ben, take care, about dungeons or site-based adventures is that when I make or build something and I make an encounter and I put it into the dungeon, if the group doesn't go there ever, number one, I can just recycle it and use it somewhere else in the dungeon. And number two, if they don't get to it next session, that's no problem. They're not screwing me over. The dungeon is there and the party can explore it at their leisure. Maybe they'll get to it in 2 weeks. Maybe they'll get to it in 3 weeks. I don't have any expectation that I designed these 3 encounters to fill the 4 to 5 hours of play that we have coming up this Friday night. And if the group goes off of that script at all, I'm screwed because I don't have a backup encounter. Or I go and say, okay, well, I guess I got to make 4 encounters now or 5 in case they turn left or right. And now I'm just caught in this mousetrap because, I'm just going to be spinning my wheels trying to keep advance of the players, but I don't know where they're going to go, and we don't have any idea of where they're going to go. But see, with a dungeon, you kind of do. You may not know where they're going to go this week, but if we as a group accept and, have acknowledged and accept that this campaign and this adventure and this group is about exploring dangerous places, then I can invest a lot of time, pre-prep, into a location and build it into something cool. And I'll know that everyone at the table has this understanding, okay, this is what our campaign's going to be about, at least for the next month or 2 or 3, while we explore this kind of exciting, dangerous place. It doesn't mean we're going to be here forever, but it means as a GM, I feel very safe in making an investment in prep.
Frostjack tipped
Frostjack,
$5.
thank you for the
Would
tip.
love to hear how West March's campaigns differ from traditionally scheduled games in terms of prep.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, West Marches, believe it or not, is still this idea, just at a broader scale. So what do I mean by that? So again, kind of as a baseline, what is West Marches? It's all about like layers of prep, right? There's like strategic prep, and then there's like tactical prep, like right before the session. But like West Marches is going to benefit greatly. Would love to hear it. Okay, yeah. Excuse me. West Marches differs. Like if I were going to start a West Marches game, here's what I would do. I would take a few weeks or whatever, how long I need. And let's say I'm using D20. I'm using 5th edition or Pathfinder. I would take a few weeks and I might design 2 to 3 interesting locations. I would probably design one to be fairly close by to the starting town. That's kind of easy. Giant rats and goblins. With rumor of silver coins. Then I might design something a little bit more difficult. In Pathfinder 2 terms, it's moderate and severe encounters. It's a little bit further away, on the other side of the Great Valley. Just a little bit more of a risk. It's got, orcs and an undead or something, or traps. Then I would design a third area that's tough. It's almost probably out of the reach of a level 1 party, but it's more aspirational. And I may be thinking those 3 locations, I'm going to build, 5 to 10 rooms in each, just so I have that ready. And then I'm going to start my campaign, and I'm going to leave some rumors, and I'm going to see where the party goes. Now, if the party takes their attention and heads towards the undead and trap-filled tomb on the other side of the Great Valley, I probably don't need to spend much time building out the other areas. So I go, okay, we're going to be exploring this for a little while. I'll put some time in there. I'll put another 5 to 10 rooms in there. And now I'm done. Now I have 20 rooms in that dungeon. That's all I ever want to have that in there. And while they're doing that, now I can go and work on a new location or maybe touch up some of the other ones. And then each week, even though the group is going to continue to explore the undead tomb across the Great Valley, I'm introducing new threads. Oh, did you hear about the ancient witch's castle on the far side of the Dark Wood? That's a new location that I'm building out. And the group's like, oh my God, there's so many threads for us to be available and interesting to, as long as we all understand that there's a little bit of a lag time. If we decide, oh, we want to go explore the witch's dark, hovel, or witch's dark castle, as a GM, I'm like, I have a basic idea of what's there. Maybe I've designed a few rooms. Because that's the other thing. I only need to be, 1 session ahead of where my players are in terms of a dungeon design. I don't need to map a dungeon from levels 1 to 3 all the way down, right? And so that's a big deal. John with a $5 super chat says, the more you know the players and the PC's goals and dreams, the easier and faster prep is. It's easier to build those key moments way ahead. Story session buys you time. Well, John, my problem there is it depends on the type of game that I am playing. When I play a D20 based game, my job, I feel, is to just set the stage. I let the players and their goals and their interests sort of dictate what they are doing. That being said, we are all in this together. And if I know that my players are really interested in something because it's a part of their character's background, or if it's because it's something that player is particularly interested in, maybe I have a player who's a rogue who really likes, disarming traps, and they've built a character that's that. Now, that doesn't mean that I have to sit there and go, okay, I have to put traps in every dungeon because I have to acknowledge this player has built a rogue with traps. No. But I think we can all agree that it's a way cooler GM who goes, I'm going to build this dungeon, this death trap dungeon that's supposed to be loaded with ancient treasures. And it's basically just like one long Indiana Jones style death gauntlet. And I'm going to put it out there. And it's going to be like a level 3 or level 4 location. And the rogue might know about this from level 1. And you know what? Well, okay, I'm getting off topic here, John. But like part of the reason why I like to do this in terms of prep is because what if I have a rogue who's just a rogue? Maybe they're just a charming swashbuckling rogue. But then I put this rumor out there when they're level 1 of this dungeon with sick loot and ancient treasures and powerful magic. And, we have to convert things into game language so everybody knows what we're talking about. And I go, yeah, this is like a level 5 or 6 dungeon full of really nasty traps and hazards and complex encounters or complex traps. And what if that level 1 rogue, that player, goes, I'm going to start building my rogue now at level 1 towards being a trap, savvy rogue. Because when we get to level 3 or 4 or 5, I want to be able to go to that place and I want to be able to crush those challenges and be well prepared for them. That I think that's like the way D&D and organic growth is supposed to happen. Not these fucking level 20 builds that you made in advance before you ever sat down at the table and ever saw anybody else's character. I want people to look at the game board and say, that place looks cool. Oh my God, there's an ancient crypt full of ancient undead. Boy, there's a lot of undead on this map. Maybe I'm going to take my character in that direction because I think that'll be useful and interesting and kind of make sense for the campaign. That's where I sort of think that we sort of build into that. John says, that's what the intro-outro discussions between GM players is for. I think we're on the same page here. Yeah, I think we are too, John. I'm just saying, like, I think that for me, the less involvement I have in sort of what the players are going to do, the better. I think it's like, yes, I can design situations because my players are interested in certain things, but I think it's cooler when I just design situations because I think that they're challenging or interesting, and it's the players who choose to respond to that in kind. But obviously, like I said, if your players hate traps or your players hate puzzles, why would I put them into my game? Right. So I do think there's sort of an expectation there. So yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting idea there as well. But yeah, so D20 I think benefits greatly from doing a lot of prep in advance. And even if you're buying an adventure and you're using an adventure path, I think you got to read that thing and you got to know what you're doing, and you got to read through it in advance so that you kind of know what what some of the flash, so you can kind of foreshadow what's going to happen later on, or so you have better context so that if, God forbid, it does start to go off the rails, you have a way to sort of, at least react in a way that might be consistent and appropriate to the game or to the NPC or to whatever motivations they are. Or if you're a complete railroad GM, at least that way you know what you have to do to keep the damn thing on the rails. So, and I think that low prep GMing in 5th edition, in Pathfinder 2, 4th edition D&D, 3rd edition D&D for sure, I think it's tough. I think it's hard to do. I think you can do it, but I think you're going to get mediocre outcomes is what I would say from that. And quite frankly, there's some GMs, there's some people out there who are more comfortable with that kind of play. They're more comfortable sitting down, and maybe they're using Tome of Adventure Design, right? A book that I love. They're using oracles, not the class, but the random item, random generators, because to create interesting ideas, and they like sitting down and being very bookish and sort of developing these ideas long in advance of the players. In fact, again, a cool GM, it's almost like, I don't want to know what my players are. I want to design an adventure unbiased as possible so that I can create a truly sort of, neutral challenge. And then the players and their and their decisions are going to matter. Because if the players, if no one took trap finding, so I go, oh, okay, then I won't put any traps in the dungeon. Well, I'm kind of making their choices meaningless, because by not choosing to do something, they're not going to be punished or penalized or, anything, because I'm just going to constantly be adapting everything to them. So, and look, what I'm describing, going through all these stat blocks, finding magical items that are both interesting and useful and thematic, figuring out balancing gold levels, making sure that you have encounters that are going to be, combat encounters that are going to be challenging and interesting, making sure that there's some degree of world building and fluffy bullshit time, and that it's not just an endless parade of combats in a row. Yeah, all that stuff does take effort, skill, time. And people don't always have that. And that's why adventure paths are so freaking popular, is because it's all just boom in one book. But I argue that I think there is a better solution, which is sort of the old school module, because instead of it just being, here is 2 years of gameplay, an adventure path that goes 1 to 20, it's not really 6 adventures. It's just one big adventure. And I much prefer the old school way of where you would just buy an interesting site or location, or even just an adventure, like a mystery, and it's self-contained. It starts, the party goes through it, they finish it, it ends, boom, that's it. Everybody, and now it's like, cool, we actually feel like we accomplished something, and it's done. It's not like, but the princess is in another castle. I mean, spoiler alert for Rise of the Runelords, but Rise of the Runelords is sort of like, you beat the bad guy, and that's the final bad guy. But then there's a note that says there's another bad guy. And then you go fight that bad guy, and there's literally another note that says, oh, nope, there's another bad guy. Then you go fight that bad guy. I'm not even kidding you here. And you find out that there's another bad guy, and then you go fight that bad guy, and you find out there's another bad guy. That is literally what happens throughout the course of those 6 adventures of Rise of the Runelords. It's kind of ridiculous. The party, in a sense, never gets any sort of accomplishment until the final adventure and they actually kill the final boss. Because up until that point, if you fail at that point, you've accomplished nothing. So it's like you're just waiting forever, sort of for it to be done. I'd much rather think of adventures like movies, where we, like an Avengers movie. Yes, there are multiple Avengers movies. But like Avengers 1 was its own storyline. It finished, it ended, they beat the threat, it was over, it was done. And, we can put a thing in it. And then Ultron came into the picture, and in the second one, it had nothing to do with the first one. They tied in a little bit, because that way the story continued to make sense. But fundamentally, he was just a bad guy on his own. And they stopped him, and that's it. Not part of some grand plan, he's just done. And I know people go, well, that's why that movie sucked. But guess what? Like, D&D games sometimes work better, like, in episodic nature, and trying to make them exactly like movies is oftentimes a losing proposition for sure. All right, let's see if I missed anything here in chat. Any questions? AOU vastly underrated. I agree. I'm not saying it's a fantastic movie. It's not. I think it's fine though. Let's see here. Jonathan says dilemmas create opportunities for choices that lead to crazy places. Exactly. Rather than putting in a interesting choice in front of the players, I'd rather just create an interesting problem and see what the players do with it, and not have any, not have any skin in the game about whether they choose to deal with it, not deal with it, go around it, go over it, blow it up. Whatever they choose to do is fine by me, because I'm not invested in a particular outcome from that dilemma. All I'm here to do is to serve up dilemmas that are logically consistent with the world that we have been building together. That's my job in my world. Guitar Guy Nick had a question. Hey, I'd like some advice with PF2E. I've been using elite stat blocks, and I'm finding that my players are not enjoying it that well. Is it a general rule of thumb to use more mooks than elite stats? Guitar Guy Nick, Unfortunately, and this is not really about prep, but maybe it is. You're prepping a session. Here's the problem, Guitar Guy Nick. When things are higher level in Pathfinder 2, and if you give them the elite template, they are going to be higher level. And more important than that, they're going to have higher ACs. Their saving throws are going to be better. They're going to have higher attack rolls and do more damage. And they're going to have more hit points. Long story short, it means that your players are going to miss more often. They're not going to crit as often. In fact, they might only crit 5% of the time, and that's on a nat 20. And they are going to be hit a lot and crit even more. Now, the game rules and the math, I assure you, are for the most part pretty well balanced. This will work. It may not be fun, though, because nobody likes to miss that much. And I think 50% missing is already too high. When you take something that the party needs a 14 or a 15 to hit, well, now you're suddenly talking about missing 70% of the time. That's a lot of missing. And that's with your first attack, before you apply any multiple attack penalty. They're also using higher level monsters or things with the elite template only exacerbates the fighter issue, which is to say that the fighter with their superior attack bonus is going to just be that much stronger in a campaign where everything has higher armor classes and defenses. So, as a general rule of thumb, the Knights of Last Call recommend, for the most part, that you create more difficult encounters by expanding them horizontally rather than vertically. And yes, that means adding additional monsters. So if I had a moderate encounter, which would use 2 monsters of the party's level, and I wanted to make it a severe encounter, right? Rather than making one of those monsters elite, I might just add a 3rd monster of the party's level. Or I could use 4 monsters that were lower level than the party, 2 levels lower. That would be a moderate encounter. And if I wanted to make that a severe encounter, I could add 2 more. So now we're talking about 6 monsters. But maybe it's my 4th edition roots. I don't like to use like 6 of the same monster. Unless it's literally like a mook, right? Like a minion. Like, oh, it's a bunch of orc rabble. But if these are supposed to be legitimate monsters, I don't even like to use 4 of the same kind. I like for there to at least be 2 different types of monsters. 3 is my preference. This is, again, from the 4th edition based design, where it's like, I want to have texture to the combat. I want there to be monsters that do different things, that perform different roles within a combat, because that way the players are making choices about which one do I engage, which one do we throw the debuff spell on, which one does the fighter go and engage. Yes, they could go engage the spellcaster, and the fighter might kill the spellcaster very quickly. But if they do that, then the fighter isn't engaging the big scary ogre that's going to close in with our cloister cleric and our sorcerer and might eat them for lunch. Now suddenly the decisions become more interesting. If you just throw 4 of the same monster at the party or 6 of the same monster at the party, there's no texture to that. It's a homogeneous encounter where every monster is the same. And so really the whole point of the encounter is just keep fighting the same monster till they're all dead. But here's the problem. Everything, including the player's turn, but also the GM's turn, takes longer in Pathfinder 2. I don't think people appreciate this. But you get 3 actions in Pathfinder 2 every round. And that means that compared to, say, Pathfinder 1, turns kind of take 50% longer. You know, in Pathfinder 1, you would move and attack. And that would be the end of your turn. But in Pathfinder 2, you could move and attack and attack. Or you could move and attack and move. So everybody's turn takes longer than it did before. So when you introduce more monsters into the encounter mix, now it's going to take even longer because each of those monsters gets 3 actions each turn. So there's a diminishing returns there. I hesitate to say that you should ever use 8 monsters in a Pathfinder 2 game, assuming you have like 4 PCs. I think the sweet spot for me in Pathfinder 2 is between 2 and 6. Okay, I think if you have between 2 and 6 monsters and they're of the right levels to add up to a moderate or a severe or like a severe plus, I think that's where you're going to get the best outcomes from them. So thank you, Guitar Guy Nick. I know that wasn't a tip, but I just want to answer that. It's the balance for 5 players. Yeah, so with 5 players, definitely add more. Definitely add more. Do not just make things harder to hit. Yeah, exactly, Casey. When you use lower level monsters, people get to do their cool shit. Their cool powers will hit. Their spells will land. It's just more satisfying. It really is. I don't know how else to say it. But if you use monsters that are too low level, if you start using monsters that are party level -3, party level -4, I hate to say it, but they don't really do anything. Their damage is so low, their accuracy is so bad. They almost are just, it's almost not worth the time that you put into even having to take their turn. And yet they're still going to take, you know, however many seconds or minutes of your GM time to run their turn. So again, I like to say that like PL +2 to PL -2 is the sweet spot. I think using monsters up to party level +2 and using monsters down to party level -2. So that gives you 5 levels to use, right? PL -2, PL -1, PL 0, PL +1, PL +2. I think if you use those 5 monster levels, usually you're going to get a pretty non-homogeneous experience that'll still work well within the core math of the system. But everything that I'm talking about, by the way, is why I say I think that these games require a lot of prep. Because I think, for me, thinking about this stuff and doing it right and doing it in advance is how you end up with good outcomes. It's how you end up with fights where people go, wow, that was a lot of fun. And I was, you know, it was challenging and exciting, but also dynamic. And I felt like I was making a lot of interesting choices. And, you know, look, we're playing these games that we know if you've played them all, we're going to win. There's an outside chance that maybe somebody goes down, but we're going to win. But that doesn't mean that that can't be fun. And that, you know, if when I sit down to solve a crossword puzzle, I know that I'm going to solve the crossword puzzle eventually, or a Sudoku. The only question is, you know, how long and what will trip me up and what will be the fun moment of realization. The same thing should be sort of applied to a combat encounter in D20. It's a puzzle. So make it an interesting one, because that way the party will enjoy solving it. All right. Let's see. Pumpkin says, I really wish PF2 had minions like 4th edition. Agreed. I did create some minion rules for the Triune fight, but I really didn't get to use them because that guy killed them all in like 1 round. And I agree that the boss mechanics, mathematically, they work in Pathfinder 2. But I don't know that they're really all that interesting. The fantasy of the party versus one bad guy doesn't really work that well. So, going back to prep. My thought process is such that sometimes I'm in the mood to do all that. And some people like to do that. Smith loves to build and write and create. And then he's almost like hands off. It's like a researcher doing an experiment. You carefully set up the experiment. He carefully sets up the dungeon, the location, the adventure, and then it's hands off. And the players are the lab rats in the maze. And at this point, your only job is to respond, to take notes, right? And to react as appropriate. You're no longer influencing the outcome of the experiment. There's a fun in that. I will certainly appreciate that. But for my own personal enjoyment, I love low prep or no prep games because 2 things. 1, it allows me to be maximally flexible. The players are no longer locked into doing one certain thing because they could change what they want to do in the middle of a game, in the middle of a session, at the beginning of the session, and we'll go in a different direction. That's fine. But number 2, I find that having to think on my feet or using random inspiration tables and then having to sort of interpret that into something that makes sense. I enjoy that challenge. I enjoy that sort of, creative challenge. But that being said, even for a low prep or no prep game, There's really no such thing as low prep or no prep. So let's talk about what I do if, let's say, I'm running a game of Blades in the Dark, and how do I manage that game? So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to, before the session, it might even be while I'm sitting there, everybody else is eating pizza, chatting, whatever, because again, this might only take me 15 minutes. The first thing I'm going to do is think, what did we do last time? Okay. So in a low prep or no prep game, the key is you always want to be linking events and actions back to the party. You want the party, low prep, no prep lets you take advantage of the fact that you can respond very quickly. If a D20 campaign, a high prep game, is a big ship that takes a long time to turn, right? A low prep or no prep game is a very, it's an agile, it's a jet ski, right? You can just turn on a dime. So take advantage of that. Don't get locked in to these long-term, evolving, massive storylines, because that's not what that game style of game is good at or prepped for. It's designed to be light and nimble and able to jump around. So one of the things that I want to do is take some notes at the end of a session and then review them at the beginning of the session. It could be 5 or 6 bullet points. What happened this session? And the first thing I want to do is go and look and say, okay, the party did this to this NPC. And then I'm going to ask myself, all right, what would that NPC do immediately? And by the way, I'm going to make sure the players know this. They're going to learn this. They might learn it through a check. They might learn it through no check. If they ask, what's going on in the city? What are we hearing? The first thing I want to be able to tell them is, you did A, you did some action, you did X. And so now NPC is doing Y. And they will very clearly go, okay, because we did this, the NPC is doing this. Now, there might be a million other things that the parties did that have impact, but we can't model everything. So I want to know what the party did, and I want to figure out 2 or 3 consequences. And I want to put them out there. I want to tell the party, you did this thing, now these 3 things are happening. Because it's always got to be more than they can handle. Because just like with the West Marches example of where I had 3 different dungeons and the party was like, oh, which one should we go to? And should we build our character? If we take a bunch of feats that are going to help us defeat the trap dungeon, then we might not be that good at going and fighting the, ogre dungeon. And it's like, yeah, you got to make some interesting choices. And the build that you're making, not in advance, but the character choices that you are making as you are leveling up and taking new feats or archetypes are actively shaping how this campaign is going to evolve. Same way as in a low prep game, I want to put 2 or 3 new challenges out there that are immediate consequences of the player's actions. And I'm going to basically say, there's no way you can't handle all 3 of these. So your choice matters, because what you choose to focus on might get resolved, or at least it's going to change and evolve. But the other things are going to sort of fester, or they're going to become bigger problems, or it's going to create unforeseen consequences. It's going to be a great tool for me, say in a game like Blades in the Dark, create new clocks that I can now use as a kind of consequence to tick to show you why not only are what you're doing matters, but what you're not doing matters. And if I'm hiding all of this behind the screen, I'm missing the point entirely. I want the players to know what they're doing, what they're not doing, and the consequences for both, at least at a high level. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to review my prep, or I'm going to review my notes. Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at some of my long-term ideas. If we were playing Dungeon World, this would be taking a look at, say, the major fronts of the campaign. If we're playing Blades in the Dark, I would be taking a look at some of our existing clocks, right? We've been creating clocks the whole campaign. Now we have 18 of them. Okay, go through them. Look at some ones that maybe haven't come up in a little while. Ask yourself, what have they been doing? Like, what have they been up to? Maybe I'll tick that clock and I'll kind of bring it to the forefront today, because maybe I think it's kind of interesting. I want to see how the group is going to respond to that behavior. I want I, as a GM, am legitimately interested in seeing the players deal with this challenge today. And I could randomly roll or do anything like that, but sometimes I think it's fine to interject. In my opinion, this is just me. When I am doing a heavy prep game, I feel very hands-off. I almost want to be unbiased. If it was up to me, I would design the dungeons and the sites and the locations without ever knowing anything about the players, because I just want it to be sort of like this, again, like this testing ground, this lab experiment, and then see how they respond. You know, I've created my devilish trap. I didn't have any unfair knowledge, and now I played by the rules of the game. But now they get to go in with their characters, and they get to test their mettle and test their might against what I presented. And there's a fun activity in that, being very hands-off. But I like to get involved. I like to meddle. I have ideas that I want to see expressed in the game. I don't like to do that in D20 because I don't think the system supports it well, and I think the rules back me up on that. But Blades in the Dark, Powered by the Apocalypse, all of these games are very low prep games because they don't what makes them a low prep game, by the way? Because they don't have monster stats. They don't have 500 pages of spells or magical items. There's no Blades in the Dark treasure vault. The rules for these games are very, very, very simple. You know, they could be long, but like there could be a lot of rules, but there's not a lot of like widgets and doodads. Does that make sense? They're not necessarily rules light games, but they don't have a lot of baggage that you have to like do the due diligence on, right? Like I've often been told that like, you know, doing your taxes isn't necessarily hard. It's just, it's very cumbersome. It takes a while. And that's kind of how I feel. Yeah, I guess I'm saying D20 is like doing your taxes. Sometimes it can feel that way, I suppose. But yeah, so when I'm doing a low prep game or no prep game, I really want to focus on what did the party just accomplish? Because I do want to bring that up. I want the party to see the reactions of what they just accomplished last session. But then over here, I also want to go to my kind of long-term notes. If I was playing Blades of the Dark, what are the clocks that are out there? If we're playing Dungeon World, what are the fronts that have been sort of advancing? You know, in a game that doesn't have these structured formats, and we could do a whole stream on, you know, fronts and clocks. Hey, Lollipop, thank you so much for that $10 tip. Let's see. Yeah, I agree. I agree that it is an art and a science, because the science of the prep is in, you know, especially in D20, it's creating mechanically interesting challenges that not only fit the game rules and challenge the players on a mechanical level, but also, like I said, I said before, combat in D20 to me is like a puzzle. And so you also want to create an interesting experience, not just a mathematical one. And so that means that, yeah, there is an art and science. And I think we've all been there, right? Where you create what seems like an awesome encounter and it just falls flat. So I think that that's where it's like, you know, kind of like a catch-22, because you do need to know what you're doing, but you also still have to have a little bit of pizzazz. You have to have a sense. And that's why we play with different GMs, because they all have a different way of handling and approaching these. So Casey says, that's sort of the beauty of playing a pre-written module. The encounter is what it is, and if the PCs make it easier or harder than intended, great. Casey, I 100% completely agree with you. I kind of love doing that. If I'm going to be completely honest with you, I like making adventures. But I really love finding a great module. Going back to 3rd edition D&D, I loved the Necromancer Games modules. They were tough, they were hard, they were old school. They kind of had a grim darkness to them. They weren't all great, but there were a lot of them that were really good. But I loved it because my bias was out of the door. This was the challenge, and my job was simply to run it. I felt like less of a game master and more of a referee or an umpire. And for D&D and Pathfinder, I know people don't always agree with me, but I'm telling you, the DNA of these games is really linked to that kind of style of play. Of, you know, even to the point where the older school versions of D&D, a lot of times the dungeon master was referred to as a referee. And so I do enjoy that with a module where I go, look, the challenge is what the challenge is. And here's an encounter with a bunch of wild wolves or boars. And it's like, yeah, and if you have a druid, maybe that encounter is a piece of cake. Because they just talk to the bears and they explain what's going on. And maybe the bears join you. It's awesome. But if you don't have a druid or you don't have like a ranger and now you got to fight them, maybe it's really fucking tough and they kick your ass and it's a real pain in the ass. But if I was designing that encounter, I would know as I was designing that encounter whether there was a druid in the party or not. And so I'm essentially making that choice for them. Because if they have a druid, I'm basically saying, I'm kind of just giving you this encounter as a kind of a cool way for the druid to show off their, their talking powers. And it's like, it just doesn't have the same satisfaction or the same feel. So I completely agree with you there, Casey. Phantom Prince asked what Blades in the Dark is. Looks like Guitar Guy Nick answered him. Blades in the Dark is an RPG that's sort of a very highly evolved derivative of the Powered by the Apocalypse engine that revolves. It's a very narrative-focused game that revolves around thieves and heists in a dark city, and the nature of the game is very different from what a D20 type game is. It really focuses more on the players being very empowered to make decisions, and it has mechanical consequences for the way that you role play your character. For example, in that game, at the end of the session, you ask questions like, did you learn something about your character or their background? Did you express an element of your character's personality? If you answered yes to one or all of these questions, gain experience. And that's like the only way you gain experience. So that's just like one very small example of why it can feel and is very different. Let's see here. Hadrick says, how do you keep track well enough players' false conclusions? Do you string them along until it matters, or do you tell them the conclusion is wrong but continue to role play without that knowledge? Yeah, Hadrick, I kind of avoid red herrings. I know that there's probably GMs out there who disagree with me, even within the community, but there are certain things that work in books, that work in movies. I just don't think they work in role-playing games, and red herrings are one of them. And in my personal opinion, if the players are really coming up with that much of a false conclusion, I think that there must have been some sort of miscommunication between me and them and what is going on. I'm not saying I'm going to literally spell everything out for the players. That's not what I'm here to do. But if I had to say where I land on the terms of like, if the players are just way off base, am I going to let them spend an entire session fucking around and doing the complete wrong thing? No way. And I know that there's a lot of GMs who, now, that's in like Blades in the Dark. In a dungeon-based game like D&D, where we're just in a sight dungeon, if the players are convinced that behind that door is a great treasure and a great trap, and they spend the whole session trying to, preparing to go through that door because they're going to deal with the big trap that's behind it, and I know that there is no trap. Well, that's where I'm more of a neutral observer, and my hands are off, and I'm like, I'm going to let them do what they did. Because again, my job was to present them with the situation, not to respond to it. So again, it comes down to the kind of game we're playing and the kind of expectations that were set with that game, and more importantly, with the session 0. So let's see here. There is a child screaming outside of in my backyard. So that's awesome. I love the summertime. It's not even summertime, it's springtime. Let's see. Casey says, it's up to the players to learn more and turn the tide in their favor. And the good thing about modules is that players cannot get pissed about you just fucking them over with an unbalanced encounter. Exactly, Casey. In fact, one of my favorite things to do, and 3rd edition D&D, by the way, it encouraged this, was put in encounters. If you know you're designing a level 3 dungeon, put in a level 8 monster. That's way too hard for the party, because they don't have to fight it. In fact, not fighting it is the right answer. But, like when you make that encounter, you're kind of feel like, oh, I'm kind of fucking over my players. But when you buy the module, you're like, look, this is just the way it was. The challenge is in you recognizing that or avoiding that or dealing with that. The game gives you a ton of different options and abilities to ways to do that. I do think that encounters like that are harder to use in very math-tight games like Pathfinder 2 and 4th edition D&D. So there is that. Combat Medic Bush, just re-upping their sponsorship, becoming, that's right, Philip Bush, one of our first adventurers, has completed their 12-month streak. That makes, I think, Damien and Bob and Brian, Self-Confessed Cynic, William Brandis, GM Scott. So Philip Bush is now the 6th person to have become an adventurer for a whole year. So thank you, CMB. I don't think you're on tonight. Probably just auto-renewing, but I appreciate it anyways. So very cool. Thank you. By the way, thank you to everybody who's supporting. I see that Super Chats are kind of lagging there, but the tip goal is well on its way to reaching $100. So thank you to everybody who tipped. And of course, again, thank you to everybody who is a patron, who supports us. If you want to show your support, we got links to the Patreon in the doobly-doob down below, patreon.com/nightsTheLastCall. We also have a link there to our Stream Elements tip page where you can throw a tip to us, or if you want to use the Super Chat functionality within YouTube, that'll go into our Combat and Tactics video. And again, if we can get to $50, we will edit and release another Combat and Tactics video. It's actually already been filmed. It just needs to be made, and it's actually about spellcasting. Specifically, fighting spellcasters in Pathfinder 2. What are some of the tactics, tips, and techniques as a martial character, as a spellcasting character, and then sort of generically as a Pathfinder 2 party? What are the things that you need to do to find better success against spellcasting foes? Because oftentimes they can be very, very difficult to fight. Let's see. Yeah, unfortunately, Pumpkin says, I love things like monster reaction rolls. A GM might not even know how an encounter will play out. Yeah, I mean, that's like the definition, right, of low or no prep gaming. So yeah, so I want to kind of finish up what I was saying about Blades in the Dark. After I sort of figure out what they did and what's going on in the game, we're going to reach the start of session. And what I'm going to do at that point is basically say, hey, here's 3 things or 4 things. I don't want to too many. 2 to 4. 3 is ideal. Here are 3 things that are kind of in play this session. 1 is kind of an immediate consequence to what you did last week. Kind of a follow-up. And if the party is still interested in that theme or that storyline or that plot element, right? That plot element was dealt with. We hopefully came to a nice conclusion with it at the end of the session. But if they want to keep pulling on that thread, here's that nugget, and you guys can go after that. Second option I'm going to give them is, yes, this is sort of an old flame, a problem that you've been putting off or a problem that's been festering, and now it's starting to become a problem. I'm going to present that to you as well. And then for the third option, it's sort of a wild card. Sometimes the third option is where I go, I had a cool idea, or I rolled something randomly before the session. Blades in the Dark itself has a bunch of tables in it. This is also where you can use your, GME and your Perilous Wilds or your Tome of Adventure Design. And you can just kind of say, hey, and there's also this sort of new opportunity or this new threat or this new thing is happening in the campaign. I roll a couple of tables and I say, you know what also is starting to happen? The dock workers are trying to unionize. They're going on strike, and the blue coats, which are like the police, have started forming riot patrols and have been, there have been clashes in the streets between the dock workers and the blue coats, and the whole city is starting to boil over, and, the streets are becoming unsafe. That's a new thread. And the party can just say, hey, what do we want to deal with? Now, by the way, in Blades in the Dark, they might go, great, how can we exploit that situation to make us a lot of money? Is there a way that we can, but you're going to be listening at that point. The biggest prep that you can do for a low prep or no prep game is just learn to listen and learn to respond to your players and really kind of take your ego and your ideas out of it. Because ultimately, the people that are really doing the prep in your low prep game are your players. You're doing it during session 0, yes. but you're also really doing it during play. You're letting them do the heavy lifting, right? In fact, I do this all the time. I do this in D20 games, but I'll do this in player. If I'm playing a Powered by the Apocalypse game or I'm playing a Blades in the Dark game, and the party asks about some NPC, and I will, they make a check and they do really well. I'll say, yeah, you do know all about this noble family. They control a massive part of the city's business and I point to a player and I say, what area? Maybe the player who made the check. I go, what monopoly does this noble family control? And they'll go, I don't know. Farming. And I'll go, yeah, farming. Okay, great. Yeah, they control almost all of the food, the foodstuffs in the city, one way or the other, right? Like I'll use them. I'll pick their brains. 4 or 5 people, hopefully you're playing with quality people, are a lot smarter than me, and they're definitely a lot more creative than me. And even if the idea is bad, at least run with it, and at least it'll feel communal. It'll feel, cooperative. And sometimes Blades in the Dark games can go at a little bit of a slower pace, or, low prep or no prep games can go at a slower pace, because you spend more time while you're playing the game talking about the game. But you know what I found? I have found that doesn't, I find that you might think that would take people out. You might think that might break verisimilitude, right? That's a word that gets thrown around here a lot, verisimilitude. But I find just the opposite. I find that when players are involved in building the world, both during session 0, but also during play, I find that they become more invested into it. Similarly, when I have a world where the players know Derek has already done the prep. He either bought the module in the adventure and he's just going to play it like it is, play it like it lies, or he's created a dungeon or a site or a location. He's filled it with traps and treasures and monsters and puzzles and all sorts of other stuff. But now his hands are off the wheel. You also get a lot of engagement there because the players know, okay, we understand the challenge. This isn't Derek trying to think ahead of us and try to trip us and try to guide us. We are on our own here. The decisions we make, good or bad, are going to lead to the outcomes that they would naturally have led to. We're on our own. We are in control of our own destiny. And that's very empowering. That can be very, that's that simulationist empowerment where you suddenly feel like, okay, this is starting to feel real. I like that. It's in the middle where I think you get the worst results. I think it's where you try to get both sides. I don't think there is a game system out there that does it, that does both sides well, quite frankly. If there is, I haven't found it. So again, I think that prep needs to match the type of game that you're playing, and I think it needs to match the type of system that you're playing. When I'm playing a high prep game like D&D, if I've read through the dungeon and I know what's in there, and I did that before I ran it, the amount of prep I have to do before a session is almost none. Like, I don't care what you did last time. I mean, I might, you guys killed all the orcs, so yeah, you know what? A bunch of ghouls moved in and ate all their corpses, and now there's ghouls all throughout the dungeon, so I'm going to update the random encounter table to now include ghouls. And I'll start to maybe include certain things on the random encounter table that show the evidence of ghouls, like partially eaten corpses of orcs that, the party left behind, and marks and the stench of ghouls and undeath. And now, as part of a natural emergent experience through rolling on the random encounter table, ghouls will start to show up and the party will go, oh, wow, why are there ghouls? Oh, because we killed all the orcs and the ghouls came in and feasted on their corpses. They came up from the lower level to kind of, because of our actions. And you're like, oh, see, we're getting that cool, back and forth behavior that leads to good outcomes. So, but again, my prep there, very minimal. I'm not really prepping at all. I did my prep in the beginning, and now we're just kind of playing it out. Now, of course, eventually the party will, get through the dungeon, or they'll beat most of it, or they'll at least be interested in going to the next level or the next dungeon. And then, you got to take some time. But hopefully, you're kind of doing that in the weeks while the party is using what you already designed. You're sort of learning what is going on, and then you're sort of building into the next one. but you're doing it far enough in advance where you can kind of feel a little bit detached from it so that you can kind of create that sort of, interesting simulationist experience. Much as the opposite for Blades in the Dark, right? Or games that are low prep or no prep. Now, I know what people are going to say here. How do you do low prep, no prep in D20? Because people are going, Derek, that's great. I'm not going to play Blades in the Dark, and I'm not going to play Dungeon World, and I'm not going to play whatever for D20. Well, the answer there is you gotta have encounters pre-built that you know are going to be interesting. It can be random, but you need to at least have some ideas of what the group might be encountered for. Because if you're flipping through the monster manual trying to pull out monsters in the middle of a session, it's going to go really, really badly. You need to have something that you can rely on, a pre-constructed list. Here are 5 or 7 combat encounters that are plausible that the party might encounter. But of course, then it's like, well, what am I going to do? Read all 7 of them? Yeah, it's kind of tough, Now, Unfortunate Pumpkin mentioned stealing things. It's fair. Stealing things is always an option. But I find that just to steal them, I feel like you're doing as much work as you would be otherwise. I mean, let's assume for a moment that you're talking about stealing something from an adventure path. This is assuming that the adventure path has created an interesting encounter. If you believe it is an interesting encounter, then stealing it and putting it into your own game is fair play. I contend that a lot of those encounters are, in fact, not interesting, at least by my standards. I just think it's usually just some random monster from the book, usually a fae, and then they just throw it in there because it fits the level range. But they don't put a lot of focus, time, or attention into making it actually an interesting puzzle to solve in terms of the map, the terrain, all that stuff. Casey, thank you.
$15. Just found your PF2 Tactics series. It's equally useful for players and GMs.
Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're finding that useful. I'm hoping that we can get another tactics video out here soon. If we can, get this the super chat goal, and if we do fill up the tip goal of views be damned, more GM screens, I'll count the overflow as leading towards the super chat. So in a sense, if you tip, you're also helping out the super chat goal. Okay, how about that? Yes, the Fae hate comes out at every opportunity. I actually think Fae are really interesting. Would it shock you to know? It would shock you to know. I ran in Season 1 of Northern Reaches, which is our community's Pathfinder 2 mega campaign. I ran a single adventure. It was Fae focused. It was called The Circle of Winter, and it was a Fae focused campaign or Fae focused adventure in the Jagged Pine Forest about a group of rogue Fae who are trying to bring about a horrendous winter, or bring winter early so that they could try to fight back against the sawmills and the axes of the lumberjacks of Northport. And it caused basically a TPK, I think, in the second encounter. Yeah, the second encounter. And I never got a chance to run it again for my players. So there you go. That's the only thing I ran in Northern Reaches was a Fae-based encounter, or Fae-based adventure. AP encounters usually aren't that interesting. AP NPCs and locations can be interesting sometimes, though. I find the NPCs to be horrible. Sometimes the locations are okay. They could be inspirational, I suppose. But a lot of times I don't even agree with their map design. I think their map design is very boring. Their map design I put a lot of emphasis in the G of RPG. I think dungeon maps, even in not a dungeon, but it's a dungeon, should be like a good game board. And a lot of Pathfinder 2 dungeons really play out more like Candyland or the Game of Life, which is to say it's just a path that there's maybe a fork that goes back to the same path. You're not really making choices. So I typically don't like the maps either, honestly. So there's that. KC, not to be gatekeepy, but I think that no low prep game requires 3 to 5 years of GM experience. Without experience, it's tough to improvise and still keep things interesting and challenging. KC, I agree. I do think that it requires skill. I do think it is. I mean, it depends what you say by challenging, right? Because I agree with you that if you're trying to do low prep or no prep D20, you got to know that if you're one of those. Hats off to you. If you're one of those GMs who knows a system so well that you can just pull out, you like already have an encyclopedic knowledge where you're like, oh, they're going down in the sewers. Oh, I'll put some were-rats down there. I know were-rats are like level 3, so I'll put 4 were-rats. That'll be a nice severe encounter. And I already know their stats, so it'll be really interesting. And you know what? I'll cut out one of the were-rats, and I'll put in some like elite dire rats instead, and I already know their stats, and I'm really good with that. And if you're just doing all that like extemporaneously in your head, you know, run your no prep game or low prep game in Pathfinder 2 or whatever 5th edition. For me, no, like even I can't do that. I find that because then it's like I find that when you do that, you end up with. Okay, and you're in a sewer, and it's just a straight tunnel, and there's 4 of the same monster. They're all were-rats, and now they're fighting you. And that's the encounter. Oh, you're in the sewer, and like, you know, someone draws really quickly on a graph paper, and they draw, I don't know, like an intersection, right? That's probably what you're going to do. You go, oh, this combat will be really interesting. I'm going to draw an intersection of a sewer, and there's going to be like a dirty river of water across the middle of it, and then I'm going to put in 4 were-rats. And they're like, look how cool my encounter is. I think that encounter's shit. Sorry. I think that encounter's horrible. And I think you are not taking advantage of the system. And I think you're making a bad encounter. I think I would be bored playing in that encounter. So just saying. Again, not trying to be gatekeepy. I'm just saying the system has a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot of shit in Pathfinder 2 and in 4th edition D&D. And I think you need to take advantage of that, or it's just going to be boring, or you're going to sit there and go, why do I even have all this shit on my character sheet anyways? So anyways, Isaiah, have you guys done a video on creating an interesting encounter? Isaiah, I believe we have. If you go into our live streams and you go back to, geesh, I don't even know when. I definitely think we did. I think we definitely did. Oh, it's called Encounter and Creature Construction. It was about 5 months ago. The thumbnail has me with a photoshopped on hard hat. Let me see if I can put the link in the. I'll put the link in the chat. Here we go. If you take a look at that, if that link, that is a link where specifically about Pathfinder 2, but it's about building interesting encounters and creatures in Pathfinder 2. And even then, I don't think it's. By the way, that's almost a 4-hour video, so strap in. And I don't even think we fully finished, so you know there's that. Anyways, it would not shock me. I think I was in that game. Frostjack, yeah, you might have been in that game, actually, now that I think about it. Flint, welcome. I'm glad you finally made it. I don't think low or no prep in D20 is easy, and for me, VTTs make lower prep. No, so that's another thing I want to talk about tonight. About why I secretly hate VTTs. Because I think it makes doing low or no prep gaming very difficult. I think VTTs have made it harder to GM than ever. I think VTTs have created unrealistic expectations in players and unrealistic expectations in players, unrealistic expectation in game masters in themselves. I think that they put too much on them to create, you know, find the right battle mat and have all this interesting stuff and going on. And you know what? Like it you know, oh, we need to have cool lighting effects and I need to put a torch in and it needs to have sound effects and the music needs to be great. It's like GMs are becoming this like video game director instead of a game master. And instead of focusing on creating an interesting gaming experience in the game itself. They're more focused on creating an interesting aesthetic or visual experience. And that, to me, look, prep time is prep time. Whether you have 2 hours, 4 hours, 30 minutes, right? No matter what you have, okay? But if you're spending more and more of that time looking through fucking digital assets, trying to find, the right thing, and you're fucking drawing in Foundry the dots so that the walls block torchlight and line of sight, and that's where you're spending your prep, we all need to collectively just step back and say, what are we even doing here? Because that's not game mastering. I don't know. I get it. It's cool, but it's horrible. And like, it's I don't like it. And if anybody thinks that's fun, I guess more power to you. But I think that is horrible prep. That is anti-prep. I think that's like the worst thing that you could be doing. Pumpkin says, I 100% agree. I see other people have amazing battle mats, and I try to push myself to do that, and then I burn myself out. 100%. I will say this, I'm going to toot the horn of it. I have no problem with a GM sitting down and spending 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 hours designing a really cool dungeon map, because that's going to get used for maybe, 20 plus hours, 30 plus hours of play, months of play with you and your players. But if you're spending an hour or just on a map for one encounter that's going to be used once, that's crazy. The encounter itself is only going to take an hour. But now everyone has to have the right graphics and the right, tokens and the right. It's a very dangerous precedent that we've sort of set for ourselves here, Now, Lollipop says you got to use VTT like you use graph paper at the table. Fundamentally, I do agree with that. But there's one problem, Lollipop. Even when I'm playing Pathfinder 2, it would be very hard for me to just throw down a quick map. Because again, I don't think that takes advantage enough of the system. I think the system, right? There are class features. There are ancestry features that have to deal with like being able to step in difficult terrain, or treating a certain type of terrain type as not being a terrain type, or half a million other things. And I think your maps in a game like PF2 or 4th edition need that sort of TLC, that tender time, love, and care to put into them to really get everything that the system is trying to offer you. And I think when you just, whether it's on a VTT or on like a Chessex wet erase map, if you just quickly go, circle over here, and then there's like a little hallway, and then there's a bunch of monsters. It's like, okay, that is a combat encounter. We're on a grid, so I guess let's go. But for me, I want my maps, especially in Pathfinder 2, to have a lot of texture. I want there to be concealment, cover, greater cover, things to take cover with. I want things like difficult terrain. I want things to jump over or leap over or fly over or climb up or climb down, right? I want to interact with this whole, environment and universe. No wonder people always say, the game is just about striking. Yeah, because when you're on this two-dimensional plane where there's nothing in it except for some arbitrary lines that are probably drawn roughly at the edge of the screen, yeah, you're just going to move up and strike. That's all that there is to the game. So, I think that a lot of bad games get made that way. Arcanist says, my group was super happy to go back to in-person and ditch the VTT, even though I put a lot of effort into it. I actually found it fun in a way. Yeah, there's a fun artistic way, the same way that like, when I'm like photoshopping something for like the channel or something like that, I might spend a lot of time getting it just right, even though it's just a silly, stupid thumbnail for the channel. And there's pride and fun that comes in that sort of creative endeavor. But, ultimately, that's not what people are signing up for my channel for, right? They're not signing up for cool thumbnails. They're signing up for gaming content. So that's like where I should be putting most of my effort, right? Plopping down a cool painted mini is a lot easier than running complicated macros. Absolutely. Absolutely. I didn't mean this to turn this into like a Luddite rant against, VTTs. When I'm running a combat that wasn't part of an AP for my players, my battle maps look like crap. And you know what? Those combats are just as enjoyable. That's great, Rain Hunter. I mean, I think that ultimately the only judge should be, the quality of the game that you're playing at your table and how you and your players are enjoying themselves. And, if whatever you're doing is producing good results, I think that you should continue to do that. What are we even doing here? Shirt when? Lance, I think that might be like the first official. The first official Knights of the Last Call shirt will probably just be like a black shirt with the logo on the breast. But there definitely needs to be a "What are we even doing here?" shirt. Frostjack, in a related question, in a dungeon game, how much should the dungeon be mapped? Only areas where you expect battles to happen, or do you map out more? Well, if I'm creating a dungeon, like. It depends what we're talking about here, Frostjack. When I make a dungeon, I have not run a dungeon on a VTT. I think that creating a dungeon in a VTT, well, Pathfinder 2 has a lot of problems with dungeons anyways because of the way that the speed at which party members move. But when I create a dungeon historically, I'm writing it on a piece of graph paper. I'm going to put in everything in there. I'm going to draw the connecting corridors and rooms. But there's never a point in time where I'm literally drawing out the entire dungeon into like a battle map, into a 5-foot square scale, where like every corridor, everything, like that all becomes descriptive. The only time something gets battle matted is sort of when you have a Final Fantasy style JRPG, there's a combat. I mean, that's even sort of like for a lot of groups, it's like, the GM's reaching for a map. He's reaching for his markers. He's reaching for the minis, she's starting to dry erase, the previous map. Oh, there's about to be a combat. Like, it's kind of like a habit or a ritual. I would never want to like physically map out the exact dungeon in a 1-to-1 scale and then have people move through it. Like, I tried doing that with Abomination Vaults. We played that on VTT, and I had everybody moving their little minis through the dungeon. It was awful. I didn't enjoy it one bit. That part. I did not enjoy that part one bit. It's luxury prep versus essential prep. Hates maps on VTTs. I kind of agree with you. Good. Arcanist, I completely agree with you. I mean, look, I'm a nerd like everybody else here. Like, I've gone overboard. I mean, if you're a patron and you watched our Triune fight, you know that the final fight of our Northern Reaches campaign took place on a floating island with all sorts of graphic visual effects and shifting winds, and like the underlying map was actually a moving image. Like, I went all in, but it was the end of an entire campaign of 175 PCs. So I felt like that was warranted, and I felt like that's an investment I was willing to make. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I'm not really going to be, doing that. Yeah, I agree. VTT make you fall into luxury prep hole way too easily. What do you think the prep time might look like in the one D&D VTT? Well, we're getting a lot of information out of this creator content summit that they had, and I don't know. It sounds like they definitely want you to be able to do everything that you need to do inside of the VTT. And I mean, I'm assuming they want to limit the prep time and limit the creativity spend that the GM has to do as much as possible, Flint. But honestly, I think it's still too early to know. Well, welcome, Ryan. Appreciate you being here. The thumbnail caught your eye. That's what the thumbnails are designed to do. Crazy. VTTs sound annoying, but they also provide us sort of a fantastic opportunity to play with people who we never get the chance to play with. We've had several campaigns, including on this channel, where we got to play with our buddy Kaz, who lives on the other side of the country. So, I've run games on this channel with, folks from Texas and Arizona and Australia all at the same time. That is something I could never do without a VTT. So I think what we do need to do, though, but see, That's the problem with D20. I've run VTT games that were basically kind of semi-quasi theater of the mind VTTs. Games like superhero games. I've run Blades in the Dark on VTT during COVID, where we were, not meeting up, and I was playing with a group and we played Blades in the Dark. And the VTT was more of like a, more of a Pinterest board than any sort of battle map. And it was a way to sort of communally access sheets. That was fantastic. That was really awesome because we never had to waste time, with the maps and stuff like that. But you kind of need the maps to play these games, at least if you want to get, I think, the most out of them. I know you can play Pathfinder 2, Theater of the Mind, but I think you're leaving a lot on the table when you do that. Now Ryan brings up a great point. Nowadays they are making the premium pre-made VTT mods. If you're willing to spend the cash, that is a fantastic option. If you really want the best of both worlds. The only downside is you're going to be pretty locked into that adventure because that's what they gave you. Unless you suddenly want to have, you went that way, and then now you're just drawing on some random map. And the other problem is you got to spend the money, and some of those things can be kind of expensive. So, yeah, Lollipop. It's a great point. Prep should be, it's a tool. You should control the tool. The tool shouldn't control you. What a cute channel. Yeah, very cute. Hey, listen, we got 50 viewers, Steven. Remember when that was a big number for you? Mr. 900 or 1,000 or 7,000 or whatever you had at one point. Yeah, we're trying here. Let's see here. Let's see. The slippery slope of players regressing to video game playstyle is very real in the VTT. I have also noticed that as well. They ask no questions and take what they see on the screen completely for granted. I have nothing to add to that. I think Casey is exactly correct. I mean, again, I don't want this to go off too much onto a tangent about VTT, but I do think that it can be problematic. Whereas Rick says, I hate theater of the mind. For me, VTT is needed for me to visualize the game, right? And that just shows you how different, how different it can be. This chat has convinced me I should be more happy with my maps that are a little shoddy. I am in an Unfortunate Pumpkin's boat for me most of the time. Even if it's well made, maps usually take me out of the game more than they immerse me in it. And I completely agree with you. But here's the problem. That only matters if I'm playing a game that cares about exactly where I'm standing or exactly how far away something is, right? If I'm playing a game that has 25-foot movement, but minus 5 foot movement because of armor, but plus 5 foot movement because of spell, plus 5 more foot movement of fleet, then fuck yeah, I want to know exactly how far away something is. And I want to have squares or, rulers that I can use to track it because that stuff matters, especially when my spell only has a 30-foot range. So that's the game that we're playing. And so if you take that away from me and then don't give me a great way to sort of interact with that, that's frustrating. That's a barrier. Now, knowing that I don't necessarily like that type of play, the key then is to play a game system where those issues are not issues. And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy games so much that are sort of, loosey-goosey. And that doesn't just have to be Powered by the Apocalypse or Blades in the Dark. 13th Age has it's written like a 4th edition game or like a 3rd edition game. But the ranges in that game are things like close, nearby. AoEs are written like 1d4 enemies that are nearby in a group. Like that's what it said. That's like the range of the spell. Nearby. What does that mean? Nobody knows. I mean, it means nearby. It means not over there, not far away, nearby. That's what it means. So, then you can get away with playing just like a really loose interpretation or a theater of the mind interpretation because the game mechanics are operating on the same level as your visual representation of what is going on. So, yeah, I think visual aids for combat in D20 is par for the course. In fact, I would argue almost necessary if you really want to take advantage of the system and play the way the system intends for you to play. So I don't think that that's like a bad thing, Sam. I think that that is correct. I think that you're doing it rightly, you know? Yeah, different tools for different groups or different systems. Yeah, that's true. Amount of disappointment equals prep time times the number of players who cancel the night of the game. Do cancellations affect your next prep time energy? Flint, absolutely. But yes and no. And the reason I say yes and no is like we ran a campaign that had, I wouldn't even call them cancellations, but you know, it was sort of like each week could be 5 players, it could be 2 players, it could be 7 players. We had just a big group of players, all of whom had pretty busy schedules. But we were playing in a massive, huge dungeon complex called Dragon's Delve. And there were many different levels that the party had access to. The lower levels were harder, the higher levels were easier. And it was so big and so massive that they never cleared out a level entirely. In fact, there were some levels that they skipped entirely. And so, and when 2 people would show up instead of the usual group of 4 or 5, it was kind of like, oh, hey, there's only 2 of us. Why don't we go back up to level 5 that we kind of skipped, and we'll poke around and see what happens. We're like 3 or 4 levels higher than everything on that level, so it should be totally fine. And it was. And it was a lot of fun, and they kicked ass, and they, a lot of names. So, I mean, obviously everybody cancels, but the best part about that was like the prep of learning and reading and doing all that had been done months and months and months earlier. And now I'm getting the sort of return on investment from that. So I didn't really have to do much of anything. And then if I'm playing a low prep game, like Blades in the Dark, if only 2 people show up, well, there is no prep, right? I'm just sort of at the beginning of the session, it's like, oh, so-and-so is entangled in a torrid love affair with 2 married women and a married man, and is unavailable for the session this week. But for you 2, what crazy shenanigans are you gonna get into this week? And we go, because those game systems don't use those same kind of like hard-coded difficulty. Well, this is a level 4 encounter balanced for 4 PCs of level 4, and since 2 people didn't show up, all of my prep is shit. I mean, that is true. I mean, in Pathfinder 2, that what I just described is the truth. But in like a game like Blade in the Dark, that's not how challenges work. So you can't be ruined by only some people show up. All right, a lot of people need the map. Interesting. So yeah, I don't quite know. Dude, you change on the fly. You can, but also, if you change on the fly, you're sort of restating the nature of existence of the world, thus suggesting that your real simulation of your world exists in a quantum state, and that the difficulty of the things around them will always be appropriately scaled to them. For maybe most people probably don't think about it that much, but I do. And when I think about that, I start going, oh, so it doesn't matter. I'm such a loser. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I mean, I'll throw Steven on the bus here. Throw Steven under the bus here. That is the kind of middle ground that I was talking about earlier. That is like between low prep and high prep that I don't personally enjoy. And it's part of the reason why when, say someone doesn't show up for a Pathfinder 2 game, I'm very like, oh, this game does not work the way I want it to work. Because now I'm in this weird in-between zone where, we're hard coding this prep and the mechanics are locked in and the encounter balance really matters. But now we're somehow starting to try to play it like it's an extemporaneous game, and it's not. And I just don't like that. I just don't like that experience. I don't like having to fumble with the stats like that on the fly. because that's not what I feel like the game is good at particularly. I mean, why, if I'm going to be doing that anyways, why don't I just play a game that is expressly designed and built around that idea or that concept? And I understand that a lot of the times the problem is people want to have their cake and eat it too. They're like, I want an extremely complicated game full of mechanics and just tons and tons of text. But I also want it to be freewheeling and easy to use and fly. It's like, well, no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. I don't care. Unless like Foundry literally completely automates the whole game for you. And also, by the way, shame on you if you say something like, I wouldn't even play Pathfinder 2 if it wasn't on Foundry, because I don't even know how to play the game. The mechanics are all taken care of for me. It's like, that's like fundamentally there's like a problem with that, right? I don't know. It's just like, it's just kind of crazy. Where was I going with this? Oh, I just want to remind everybody at the end of the stream, because Laughing Out Law only has 15 hit points left. At the end of the stream, I'm going to start a timer. And if nobody tips for that timer, whoever is the hype boss at the end of the stream will be the able to decide next Tuesday's topic. So it's a lot of power in your hands, but that's gonna be coming up over the next 15 minutes or so like that when I start to wrap up the stream. But just as a reminder, if you've been saving your tips, you might want to save them there for the end. So. And get to control what the next stream is. Arcana says, my campaign just wrapped. I had 2 people who would sometimes cancel last minute out of 6, and I'd certain monsters be given a range of their being, say 1 to 3, based on the number of players. I mean, I think that's you just being practical. Look, what I'm talking about is like, well, I wouldn't want to do that anyways. I'd rather have the world be the world, and if the players have to, because that's the problem. The problem is, you're being realistic and you're doing the right thing and you're doing the right thing for your group. And I think I applaud you and you're doing everything right. My point is, that's the problem with modern adventure design is you as a GM and your group are like priced into, you're locked into. They have to go to Thistletop this week. They have to fight Gogmort, the Druid, and the Panther. And Gogmort is level 4, and the Panther is level 2. So the party of 4 level 3 PCs or 4 second level PCs all need to be there. And if someone doesn't show up, they still have to go fight Gogmort. So now I've got to change Gogmort's encounter. I've got to put a weak template on him, or take away some spells, or get rid of the fire pelt cougar pet, or whatever. Because the option of just going, oh, we don't have our dwarf with us today, I guess we're not going to go to Thistletop, isn't an option. It's one of the reasons why you can't have really difficult encounters in most adventure paths, because the players are on a path to have to encounter everything. They're locked into that path. And so if I say, here's a level 8 encounter when you're level 3, the party's like, well, what are we supposed to do with this? This is the way we have to go. So like, or you could say, well, it's an optional encounter. And you go, okay, well then we'll just go around it. Like, why is this even here then? It doesn't really make any sense. Because that's why you get put into the situation where you suddenly have to change things on the fly, as as Steven was saying from Roll for Combat, where you have to sort of, balance it on the fly, because it has to be balanced for the game to work. And I'm suggesting that if I'm playing in a system where either the balance doesn't matter, or there's such an array of challenges and none of them are required or necessary, it's all just the players choosing to encounter what the players choose to encounter, then I don't feel the need to change anything. Because yeah, you're right. If you went down to level 5 tonight of my dungeon, 2 people didn't show up, you'd get your ass beat real bad. But I'm not going to, on the fly, suddenly have to change everything on level 5 just because 2 of your party members didn't show up. Just don't go to level 5 tonight. Go somewhere else. Go to level 3, go to level 2. Spend some time crafting in town. I don't know, do something. But when you're on an adventure and the princess needs to be saved, the prince is being kidnapped, the evil villain is going to hatch their plan, you feel like, well, we have to go. I have to go fight the thing. I have to go save the town. I have to go fight the giants. I have to go to, fight, Tzin Shalast. I have to fight, Karzug or whatever, because otherwise if we don't, I guess the world ends and we're heroes or something. You know, so that's you kind of get put into a tough spot. Let's see. This isn't the incentive stream. What are you doing, Lollipop? Well, we talked about prep for a long time, but let's see here. Yes, the difference between story-driven adventures and players-driven adventures. But fundamentally, story-driven adventures are called books. We read them on our own. I struggle to understand how people find that enjoyable. But they do, because a lot of people play video games. And in my mind, video games are story-driven adventures. So, and I don't enjoy those, but other people do. So, I mean, maybe I'm the weird one. I'm the odd one. So I'll own that. Exactly. You go to level 4 dungeon instead of the level 5 dungeon. Or you go to the level 3 dungeon, you know, and you do whatever you want. But it's not like if I go, but if you don't go to the level 5 dungeon, everyone in the town and everyone that you care will die, and you'll let everybody down. And the players are like, okay, I guess we have to go to level 5 then. And I'm like, yeah, you do. And everything's super tough. And you're like, okay, so we're all just going to die then? You're like, ha 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 ha. Yes. And it's like, all right, that was not interesting. And you're like, okay, well, how about I rescale everything on level 5 to be weaker because you all are not as strong today. And you're like, okay, so if we went and like got stronger doing something else, you would what? Make everything on that level tougher too? Was that so? Nothing we do matters at all. Like I just think it creates just horrible incentives for player agency. And when I'm a player and when I'm a GM, player agency is everything, you know, that I want to do. Can we get some more tips on how to do low prep in D20? So yeah, the key way to do low prep in D20 is number one is you need to have intelligent, well thought out encounters designed ahead of time. You can't just be throwing monsters together at the last minute. You need to have monsters that you're comfortable with, monsters that you understand, monsters that you know are going to be interesting. You need to understand how they work, and you need to be prepared to be able to play them, if need be, in a combat in an interesting and, you know, sort of exciting way. Because fundamentally, if you get rid of the other thing you need to do for low prep D20 is you need to be very comfortable with your game system's DC system. Whether you're using level-based DCs or you're using sort of static, simple DCs in Pathfinder 2, or, you know, whatever the DCs are in 5e where it's flat math, because you're going to be forced to, on the fly, hand out DCs. And as like a general rule of thumb, you know, you should at least know, like, this is the 50-50 DC, this is the hard DC that maybe is like 40% chance or 35% chance, and then this is the easy DC, which is like, you know, 65 or 70% chance of success. You should know those 3 DCs. And that way, when you're going and someone asks you how hard it is to do something, you just say, it's easy, it's medium, it's hard. Or you just use the simple DCs and you just make a gut instinct and say, yeah, that feels like that's something a trained person could do. DC 15. No, that feels like that's something an expert would need to be done. DC 20. Master 30, Legendary 40. I think I might be pulling those numbers out of my ass. Those might be right, the right numbers. I think it's 15, 20, 30, 40. I could be wrong, but maybe it's 50. Any case, you should know how the DCs are. You should know some monsters. And I know you're saying your gut instinct is telling you random tables and oracles are the best way. Not necessarily. I mean, that can definitely be a way to create, you know, evolving things. But I mean, that, like, in other words, like to create interesting events. But that's true in not necessarily for D20. You know, that's true for Blades in the Dark as well. How you come up with those threads, you know, when we were talking about Blades in the Dark, I was talking about, you know, look at your previous notes. Okay, what is something the players just did? What are the consequences of that? Put a couple threads out there, one at least, that are tied to what they just did. What's an old thread? Put that out there. What's a new thread? Maybe you have an interesting idea, or maybe it's something that you rolled up on a random table. You're going to present those as options. That's the same in any low prep game, whether it's D20, whether it's Blades in the Dark or whatever. You're just creating, interesting opportunities out there, interesting options for them. And then the players are going to choose to engage with the ones that that they're interested in, they want consequences for. That's not the challenge of low prep play in D20. The problem is once they start engaging with that chosen path, now I have to create mechanics, traps, DCs, monsters, magic items, balanced encounters, balanced treasure, balanced gold, all on the fly. And I think that is very difficult. And again, probably the best tip is have an encyclopedic knowledge of the game system. I mean, that's just me being honest. The GM screen, be familiar with it and use it and have it be, something interesting. But I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to lie to you. A lot of people who run game sessions like that in Pathfinder 2, and this was definitely true in Northern Reaches, what do you end up doing? You end up finding a monster that works for the level range. It's, we're going to play low prep. We're going to play no prep. Oh, the party wants to go into the woods. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to figure out some level appropriate monster that would be in a wood. I'm going to put 4 copies of that monster. I'm not going to make an interesting dynamic encounter. I'm just going to put X4, X5 of that monster into one fight. I'm going to bring the token over. And then when they get treasure, you're probably just going to give them gold. You're probably just going to give them gold or like striking runes, fundamental runes, for armor or potency runes, because you know what? Like you don't have the ability to just suddenly go, what would be a thematically appropriate thing for the group to find in this situation? It's just like, it's tough. It is tough to do it well. You can do it random, and that can lead to potentially interesting outcomes, but it could also lead to dog shit outcomes. So I think that it's a difficult thing. And I think Pathfinder 2, in a way, and 4th edition, by the way, to be clear, I love 4th edition, but I think 4th edition maybe suffered even more from this because 4th edition was actually designed around having really interesting puzzle-like combats with multiple roles of monsters supporting one another. And the DMG talks about building an encounter map to use hazardous terrain, difficult terrain, hindering terrain, obscuring terrain, line of sight blocking terrain, and how you should mix and match those things to create a dynamic, interesting, tactical minis combat experience. And that the game and all the powers and the feats and the racial abilities and the class abilities were all designed to interlink in an environment in which those things were present. And so if you just remove those things, suddenly people start looking at their feats and their powers, and they start going, I don't think this really does a whole lot. I probably should just take the thing that makes me do the most damage, which is oftentimes the most boring thing on your character sheet, the big most deeps. And that's what people end up focusing on because the encounters don't have anything there's no other tactical complexity to them besides for how many hit points do I have to whittle through before this thing is over. Let's see here. Take level 3 and level 4 to war with level 5. Also could be a very viable option, Lollipop. Again, would I want to do that using Pathfinder 2 stats? I don't know. That might be kind of rough. Sam, you guys just put into words something I've been trying to get across to some friends when it comes to video games versus TTRPGs. In my opinion, the dynamic nature really elevates the enjoyment. Yes. I mean, that for me is the distinction, is that, ChatGPT, what are we on, 4? So ChatGPT 6 pending. There is no computer that can respond dynamically the way that a dungeon master or that a human can. So you're not a computer. Computers are better at being computers than you are. So don't be one. Lean into your strengths as a human game master, and not shun them. Rain Hunter says I got my DC numbers correct, which is sweet. Arcanist King, of course. Not gonna lie, there has been plenty of sessions where we did a bunch of role-playing or talking to NPCs or whatever, and there's only like 1 hour left in the session, so a random goblin encounter in the wood hits just right. I've had those sessions too. And you know what? I think you're completely correct. I mean, RPG systems should not be designed to have fun. I've said this before. You can have fun with them, but the system itself should just be designed to accomplish a stated goal and game objective. True. But an RPG session run by you or your friend for your group of friends or players should be about having fun. It should be about creating an enjoyable experience, because, or at least I should say an entertaining experience, because not all entertaining experiences are always fun. It sounds kind of weird. Sometimes we like to feel sad and disappointed and angry. So you definitely want to create an emotional response. If, you know, the group gets together and everybody's just having fun, shooting the shit, FBTing, fluffy bullshit time, you know, in town, in the tavern, spending gold, talking to the wenches and, you know, buying, you know, getting their armor, you know, customized by the dwarf blacksmith in town or whatever other, you know, sort of generic response we have. Like, that's cool. And like, that's part of what makes RPGs charming. And if you look around the table and everybody's smiling and nodding, you're like, okay, we're doing it. And you're having a good time. If you're having a good time, great. Everybody's on the same page. We're all doing the same stuff. And then everyone's like, you know, we should go fight something. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, you hear rumors that there's been a bunch of bandit attacks in the nearby woods. Small creatures with, you know, beady yellow eyes have been seen lurking about the goblins. Okay. You go have a goblin fight. I think that's fine. I think that's absolutely fine. Yeah, I mean, look, we get it that there's a difference between the GM putting a goblin encounter in your way because it's what the GM wants to do. It's quite different when it makes sense, when you're like, hey, what's going on in the woods? And is there something that we could go deal with? And the GM goes, oh yeah, there is. And then they come up with something, or they roll something randomly. That's different. That is, if anything, that's the GM presenting a real world, right? It's the DM, you know, sort of, you know, presenting that. And by the way, you know, as we kind of start to come in here to the 9 o'clock hour, by the way, we're $15 away from our stream goal. I just wanted to throw that out there. The best prep pit all the way at the end for people who made it all the way. Dungeon World principle number 5 or 4 tells us, give every NPC a name. Now, that doesn't literally mean every NPC, but if the players interact with a NPC, you should probably give them a name. Don't try to create names out of whole cloth. Have on your GM screen a list of 20 or 30 names, male, female, non-binary, elvish, dwarvish, humanish, and or whatever, generic names that you can use. Cross them out as you go through. It doesn't have to be random. You don't have to roll it fucking randomly because you're like, it needs to be random. No, just pick a name that looks good and you can pronounce and sounds good. Get into the habit, when you have an NPC, if the party's going to be interacting with them for more than 5 or 10 minutes, tell them their name, write the name on a note card, fold the note card in half, put it on your GM screen, or put it up on your VTT. Let people see the name. They'll see the name. They'll hear you talking. They will connect with that NPC. Always, always give your NPCs names. Never, never, never just try to come up with names out of whole, you know, just out of thin air. I've been doing this for 30 years and I'm good for maybe like 1-2 names. And then I start being like, Thranrar. Wait, wasn't the last NPC's name Throngar? Yeah, but this is Thrungrir. So it's Thrungrar and Thrungrir. Can you spell that? TH. What? Like, it's just have the names already down. That's not really prep. That's more of just like GM advice, but like have that ready to go whenever you can. Yeah, Tony, that's excellent. You know, have that name. Yeah, have that name generator. That's, you know, got it. Listen, if the group comes up with their own nickname for the NPC, that's even better. That's gold. Lance, a player of mine, is speaking of Folian the World Weaver, but everybody in the party called him Time Elf because they basically said he's like an elven Doctor Who. And he kind of was like an elven Doctor Who. So they just called him Time Elf instead of calling him Folian, the World Weaver. But hey, you know what? It's fine because now we have a common language that we can use to contribute and kind of coordinate. Let's see. So we're getting close to 9 o'clock. Are there any final questions or thoughts or ideas? Again, I really wanted to point out that, if I had to sum up, I number one, don't spend, if you're going to do a 4-hour session, don't do 4 hours of prep every session. What the hell are you doing? That's horrible. That's dumb. You need to be thinking about how to manage your time. Again, I really certainly appreciate, hey, Casey, thank you for that very generous super chat. Casey says, so much good advice. I appreciate the no BS approach. I'll be coming back. Casey, well, I'm glad you had a great time. We're live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7 p.m. Tuesday's been kind of a wild card slot for us recently. Thursdays, we were doing our archetype rankings and spell rankings for a long time. Now, we're going through my book of collection, and we're just rating every single book in my RPG collection. So it's kind of an interesting experience, Casey. So hopefully we'll see you maybe on Thursdays. Thank you for that very generous super chat. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for that. Again, I was trying to, before generosity kind of overtook us there. A long duration or a game with a lot of prep, like D&D or Pathfinder 2, I think could be a lot of fun. Number one, you can buy your solution. Now, I still believe that the days of us creating cool modules is lost. I would love for somebody to be able to do that nowadays. I don't know why no one does that, but maybe that's not what the people want. So they're giving the people what they want. People want movies that they can kind of play through on their own. And that's what, with pre-written plots, with pre-written NPCs, with pre-written motivations, with pre-written story beats that create these dramatic moments that are sort of priced in and locked in, and it's got to happen in book 1 so that in book 2 the NPC can do the thing that leads to book 3, that leads to book 4. It's not for me. But if it's for you and your group and your players, that's a fantastic low prep approach for D20 or Pathfinder. But I personally prefer more the approach of, hey, I'm going to invest in creating a complex site or location, and then I'm going to use it. It's going to be like my maze, and the PCs are my lab rats. And I don't want to mess with them when they're in the maze because that would ruin the experiment. I built the maze to see what would happen. And now I get to stand back and I get to see it play out. And most importantly, that means I don't have a lot of prep to do on a session-to-session basis. It also means if you're like me, or probably most of our viewers are older, you might have, weeks where you have tons of time available to you. And then you might have months where you have no time available at all. That style of play where you have to prep 4 to 6 hours every session, every week, you're just going to fuck yourself over because you're going to eventually get to the point where you can't prep for the next session. And then it's, hey, I got to cancel, or it's going to be something, horrible. Whereas if you take advantage of lulls in your schedule to really put in a lot of time and build out a lot of dungeon and build out a lot of sites and build out a lot of interesting concepts or ideas, get some stuff written down, mechanics, treasure, and all that stuff's kind of written down in stone, or at least fundamentally sketched out, then when you do get busy, you can rely on that and say, great, I'm prepped to go. I've got enough here to last me for several months. And then during the course of that several months, you might suddenly find, hey, I've got a week or two where I've got nothing going on. I kind of know where the group is going, what they're interested in. I think I'm going to build the next thing they're going to go do. And I'm going to use that time I have right now to put, 5, 10, 20 hours in. Look, prep is prep. You're going to spend some time depending on how fastidious you are, the level and details of your notes, how much information you write in. Just put in a lot of detail. And if you do that, great. Now you're ready for the next several months of play, And I think that's how a lot of it goes for us. Tony says, that feast and famine time cycle is too true. Yeah. And again, that's the danger of getting priced into, I have to prep 4 or 5 hours every week. because some weeks you're just not going to have that time. The session's at 7 p.m. You haven't even looked at the adventure. You haven't even looked at your notes. You have nothing ready. You're at work till 5:30. And everybody wants to play. So now what are you going to do? So, like, prep when you can, and then use that prep to sort of make your way through it. And again, adventure paths can be useful for that. There's no doubt about that. That's probably one of the reasons they've been so popular. But at the same time, I find that, that style of play is itself problematic. Let's see here. Yeah, the fantasy name generator website is great. I like it. I still like to have I'll pre-make them Arcanist. I want that list of names to be sort of pre-vetted by me. Names that I think are cool, that I'm going to remember, that I can pronounce. I don't want to be like going to the fantasy name generator, hitting generate, and then it's like a name, and I'm like, well, no. Hit another one, I'm like, well, no, I don't like that one. Hit again, no, well, okay. Like I want it to just be boom, 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 ready to go. Pumpkin says it wants modules. Sites are better than stories. I agree. Not everybody does, but I do agree. Sorry if it's been discussed. I just joined. Last session, a player. I'm not sure what that means. Call me Al, but last session, a player. I don't know. I don't know what that means, but maybe explain it. Last session, a player asked about the history of the world, and I didn't know the answer to. You know what? Honestly, Al, if someone did that to me, I would love it. And I'll tell you why. Because what you do is you say, you know what? I don't know the answer to that. Let's find out together. And you let your players shape, and you have a fun conversation, and you turn your session maybe into a world building exercise. And, your player asks you like, well, what is the history of this town? And you say, you know what? I don't know. Let's find out together. And they're like, what? And you're like, yeah. Susan, how old is this town? Is it hundreds of years old? Is it thousands of years old? And she goes, thousands of years old. And you go, great. Ralph, like, who founded it? Was it men? Was it elves? Was it dwarves? Was it orcs? Who originally founded this city? And he goes, I don't know, orcs. Just because he wants to be a troll and he wants to be difficult. And you're like, cool, awesome. Do orcs still control the town? You're asking somebody else. And you're just boom, boom. You're just feeding off of everybody's answers. And suddenly within 20 minutes, you have the most awesome, amazing, incredible town with this incredible backstory that every single one of your players will know by heart because they built it. They'll be invested. Now, also, as a side note, if you threaten that town, you can pinpoint certain things. Oh, do you remember when the Seventh Crusade of the Elven Alliance took the city from the Orc warlords, and as a parting gift, they built a great triumphant arch? Well, now, when you describe how that triumphal arch was destroyed in the dragon attack, like the person who built that almost feels personally attacked, even though that was 500 years ago. But yeah, it's just those are part of the reason nowadays in modern day Derek, part of the reason I play RPGs is to have those kind of conversations and to have those kind of moments. Darth, welcome. I missed the whole stream. We'll catch this one on VOD. Darth, I think it's an interesting stream. We got a little bit tangential, of course, as we always do. But I think I tried to make a point, which was that, some games are better for lots of prep, and there's a way that you can optimize that and use that. And then there are other game systems that I think are better designed for low prep. And I think sometimes part of the challenge is recognizing what games are which. But on this topic, asking players to contribute to the history is so much better than prepping the extra history. It also helps with prep time because, the other thing too, again, is if a game system should be focused on what the game system's about, but a session of RPGing should be fun. If everybody's having fun participating in telling this sort of communal story, then yeah, maybe it eats up an hour or two, but it doesn't matter. Everybody's having a good time. It shouldn't be wasting time. It should be having fun. And I call me out. I mean, I know that some people, that's the danger of using pre-written stuff, pre-written adventures, pre-written campaigns, pre-written gazetteers, pre-written, atlases. You worry about getting it wrong. You worry about, oh shit, in my campaign, Absalom is a scum, it's a Mos Eisley. It's a den of scum and villainy. It's a seedy underground metropolis where roving gangs of criminals, corrupt the city from the highest to the lowest. It's sort of a Galarian version of Gotham City. And it's like, okay, number one, that sounds pretty cool. But yeah. Oh, has Derek been shit talking low prep at D20 again? Yes. I basically spent a good 20 or 30 minutes shit talking low prep in D20 again. That is correct. Let's see here. Darth says, I'm going to start using an EXP trigger for Blades in the Dark for adding to the story, suggesting a Devil's Bargain. Yep. Again, that's going back to our incentive stream, Darth Gorlock. If that's a behavior that you want to see and you want to reward and you want to encourage, the best way to do it is offer an incentive. Remember, the behavior that gets rewarded gets repeated. And we got a $10 super chat from Tony Sopanos. It says, have you ever used things like point crawls and nodes in your adventure design? Absolutely, Tony. Absolutely. In fact, a patron of mine, Ben, who was here earlier, sorry about that. He actually built his own point crawl book, and he got it printed on demand, and he sent me a couple copies of it. And it's just designed as like a series of, I don't know if this thing will focus. It's designed as a series of interlocking nodes, and you can just use this as a way to sort of create point crawls. I think that is a great design, Tony. I think it's useful for D20. I think it's useful for non-D20. I think point crawls are fantastic for things like the Underdark, or like a massive, let's say you had some ancient valley, like a valley of the kings in Egypt. Like you had some massive valley that was filled with dozens and dozens of tombs and giant statues and mausoleums of long dead kings from an ancient, and the group has got to explore it. Well, I don't want to map every square inch of that. What's really more important is what is sort of the geographical relationship between these, points, and, what are some of the things that might occur as you're going from point A to point B. That's where a point crawl node-based structure can be very powerful and useful. Same thing with like if you're doing some sort of like long duration Underdark exploration. I would never want to map that out directly, but I also wouldn't want it to be completely worthless. So, that's where I think the node-based design comes in.
Screw combat fantastic. And tactics. GM
oh, Darth Gorlock. Darth Gorlock says, screw combat and tactics. GM streams are better. Well, I appreciate it. Although we did get very close to the C&T. So, I did say that if the stream chat goes over. But Darth, I know you were late to this, but we are coming up on 9:15. So what I'm going to actually do, Darth may have just stealed it with that very generous tip, but I did say that at the end of the stream, whoever's the hype boss will decide next Tuesday's topic. And so I'm going to go ahead and start a timer here. If the timer ends, Darth Gorlock will become our decider. But if someone tips, that'll reset the clock back to 3 minutes if Darth Gorlock gets taken out. But anyways, but thank you for that generous tip for putting us over the end there. Let's see here. I already have a Blades in the Dark stream 2 queued up. Someone else can decide the next stream. Well, listen, Darth, if you want to pass the torch, you can do it. But unless someone comes in, it's going to be you anyways. Let's see. Hadrick says, recycle and reskin prepared. Yeah, Hadrick. I mean, I think that is a fantastic idea. I think you got to be careful because you don't want it to be, you don't want to create a quantum ogre problem, right? Where you design an encounter and you go, come hell or come high water, I am using this encounter. We kind of touched on this on the one encounter design, but this is one of the reasons why I love creating encounter templates. I especially did this in 4th edition D&D because of the way 4th edition D&D worked with monsters and roles and levels, I could create a basic shell of an encounter, and I could use that shell at level 2 or 7 or 14 or 22. And the only thing I had to do was just slot in different monsters that were level appropriate. Everything else about the encounter would still be interesting and the same, because the encounter fundamentally was built as sort of a template. And then all I was doing was slotting in existing monsters that meet the levels. Absolutely, first look streams are on the table. As long as it doesn't violate YouTube policies, I think we're good there. Let's see here. Our Arcanist says, the solution we found was small time gap between the start of the setting and the first homebrew campaign someone ran, where we all just said anything the DM makes up going forward is new canon. Yeah, Arcanist, I mean, kudos to you. A lot of people have a problem with that, actually. That's actually kind of, I like that solution. I think that's the great way to go. But yeah, I think some people, do have that problem. Reusing factions of monsters can let you make encounters on the fly while also making all the fights matter to the faction. Yes, I think that, I talked about using templates of monsters or using families of monsters. I think that is where you can get some benefit out of, low prep D20, but I still fundamentally believe that it's kind of, a tough spot to be in. So, all right, we got 15 seconds left. Looks like Darth is going to be our hype boss. So Darth, I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch, but, looks like Darth is going to be the indeed winner. 2, 1, and we're done. So Darth is our hype boss at the end of the timer. So Darth, you let me know what you want next Tuesday's stream to be, and we will do that. And we'll talk about that. And Darth, you're a hero. I mean, Darth, if you want to come join me to talk about it, you're welcome to do it. Frostjack, were your templates something like 2 artilleries, 2 brutes? Exactly, Frostjack. I would create an encounter. I would draw like a map. I would draw like a rough sketch of a room. And then I would maybe put in like a circle and say that this was difficult terrain, DT. And I might draw a line and I might say that is, HT, hindering terrain. What kind of difficult terrain? What kind of hindering terrain? Well, that's going to depend on the level. At high level, it might be a boiling pit of souls that, Vecna has conjured forth from the ethereal dead. At low level, it could just be, water. It all depends on the scale of the level. And then I might say, okay, in the back left corner and the back right corner, there's 2 artilleries who are going to try to stay in the back, use the difficult terrain as sort of a barrier so that they can shoot down on the PCs who are entering here from the middle. And then I'm going to put a brute here and a brute there. And the brutes are going to try to engage on the party squishy as much as they can. But I won't tell you, and then I can even put on the side, if this is a level 5 encounter, use these brutes, use these artillery. If it's level 10, use these brutes, use these artillery. If it's level 25, use these brutes, use these artillery. But a lot of times I will just make that template, save it, store it. And then not only, number one, can I pull it out whenever I need it, but I can reuse that template. Campaigns are very long things. The party is not going to know or really remember if I use that template 2 or 3 times, especially if I use it once when they're level 3, once when they're level 17, and another time when they're level 25. It's so far apart with different monsters, with different things, but the fundamental basics of the tactical challenge remain the same. And that's where I've put my prep in. And that's letting me kind of get multiple uses out of it. And I always thought that was, for me, that was always a very, very successful thing. And quite frankly, also very fun. Pumpkin giving some love for Darth Forged in the PF2 game. His encounters are next level. And we're talking about how not dying is really great. Which is, again, very true. I mean, I have a lot of stuff to say about death in D20, but ultimately I think the game is better when you can't die. Can you talk a bit about prepping for your party versus general prep in D20? Yeah, I mean, I think what it really comes down to is it's a fundamental philosophical decision that you have to make. Like I said earlier, I know you kind of joined late, Darth, but like if I throw an encounter at the party and I know that having like a druid or a ranger or someone who has animal control, animal empathy powers is going to make that encounter really easy, And if they don't have access to that, that encounter might be very hard. When I throw that at the party, and I know that they have a druid who has those powers, I'm kind of just serving it up to them on a platter. And it loses, I think, some of its value for that kind of game. At the same time, if I don't give the party members encounters that let them, quote, show off their skills, then I also feel like I'm doing them a disservice, because now I feel like I'm not allowing them to have abilities that are going to come up. And so then it feels like their choices didn't matter either. So it's a very tough situation, which is why, like I said, I prefer to create site-based adventures and then to create a variety of encounters, which I don't think the party is ever going to necessarily encounter all of them. And then it's like they get to be the ones who pick and choose, because then if I throw, oh, well, over here is the undead encounter, which is guarding a very powerful suit of magic armor. And over here is the animal-based encounter, which is guarding a lot of gems and gold. Then the party can make a decision. They say, well, we have a cleric who's good at, has healing hands and 3-action heal and can really mess up some undead. Let's go deal with the undead encounter. And we're going to get the magic armor. You're like, yeah, but we really, really want the money. We don't really care about the armor. Okay, well, we can go fight that animal encounter, but I think we're all going to agree that not having a druid is going to make that a really tough encounter. And at least we kind of feel like, oh man, it'd be cool if we had a druid, but we're making that decision consciously. We're not being forced into making that decision. And I think that's why, it's so important. I'd love to hear Darth talk about prep and PF2 on stream. Yeah, I always felt like building for your party made choices in something like PF2 meaningless, but it makes for something for Avatar Legends. Absolutely agree. But I would argue that you're not really making them. Yeah, it's a very, we're not going to get into it. It's 9:20. It's almost 9:30. But I completely agree with you, Darth. I would say the same thing's true about Legend of the Five Rings. I think designing challenges and scenarios which are designed to test or push, a character in a game like Legend of the Five Rings or Avatar is actually what you're designed to do. If you're not doing that, you are failing as a GM. You're not living up to the principles and the agendas that you need to do to run that game successfully. Yeah, he already did that seminar. That was a Patreon exclusive Darth Gorlock special. I don't know. Prepping for your players lets you give players a chance to shine as well as a challenge certain players. Yes, I agree with you. But it's also very, I don't know. It's very patronizing. I feel like it's very patronizing, personally. I do. If it works for you and your group, I say go for it. But, for me personally, I think it can come off as a little patronizing. That's all right. We're only half hour over, We haven't had the archetype stream, so it's been a long time since we've, gone 3 hours or 4 hours or whatever like that. But, yeah, that's okay. Well, we'll figure out what Darth wants to do, and we'll figure out next week's stream. Thursday, we're going to be back doing more of our book ranking. By the way, I don't know if you saw it. I'm going to post it in the stream. I'm definitely going to post it in the notes of the stream, but I'm also definitely going to talk about it on the Patreon. One of my friends in real life and patron member, Obvious, went through and time-stamped every book I reviewed from last Thursday's book stream, and then included links to where you can pick up the PDFs of every single title that I linked for. And it's the Knights of Last Call affiliate link. So always a good pleasure. If you want to support us and you don't want to give us money, that's fine, but you should at least use our affiliate link. So anyways, we are going to continue to do that posting. We're going to continue to, that stream where we're going to keep going through all of my books, and hopefully, if not him, me, we'll go through and continue to do that due diligence and really map everything out, because that way we have this great ability for people to go through this list and just find what they need and kind of be able to look it up. And of course, obviously too, if you're interested in picking it up, maybe you want to use that nice last call drive-through RPG affiliate link. It doesn't cost you any extra money. we just get a few pennies of the dollar for anything that you buy on DriveThruRPG. So we have a link to that below. Also, link to our Patreon. If you enjoy these conversations, even if you kind of feel a little angry about these conversations, I actually recommend that you join the Patreon, because it's not a group thing. We like people who have different thoughts and opinions. We're going to push you. We're going to listen to you. We're going to be influenced by you. You're going to be influenced by us. We'll not always agree. Everybody plays these games differently, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean that we can't all get better, and we can't all do, we can't benefit from learning about RPGs, about how other people play these games, and just try to raise the collective consciousness. That's what Knights of the Last Call is all about. That's what our community is about. Yes, everyone disagrees, especially with me. That's sort of the tagline of the Patreon. And of course, this month, some of our lucky patrons who were some of our top players and top game masters got early previews of Northern Reaches Season 2. So we are going to be rolling that out this month. And that is our Mega Pathfinder 2 campaign. You have to join as our champion, which is our $10 a month level. But if you sign up as a champion when Northern Reaches launches here later this month, you'll be able to get onboarded into the game. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So Pumpkin says, I've been loving what I've been seeing of the previews. It's amazing. So it's Pathfinder 2, but it's a very different experience. We have a lot of house rules, a lot of mechanics that are designed to promote certain types of behaviors, to sort of reinforce the community aspect. So, and there might be some stuff in there you don't like, but that's okay, because typically anything that is in our game can be changed by the players. The game is sort of a living world where the actions of the PCs can literally reshape the rules of the game. So it's a very fun kind of community experience, and we had a lot of fun with it in Season 1. It was a huge success, and I'm certain Season 2 is going to be as good, if not better. So Isaiah says that they don't quite agree, and then is pointing to the disagreement that they had with me up above. Exactly, Isaiah. I mean, I think it's patronizing. You don't think it's patronizing? Yeah, I mean, we're probably both right in our certain circumstances. So, I'm on board for that. I have no problem with you disagreeing with me. You might even be right. So, I'm more hyped for the Pikachu beside my name than the rules. Is that to say that you don't like the rules, Darth, or is that to say that you just really like Pikachu? I'm curious. So yeah, Patreon, fun times. Studio, fun times. We're going to have a lot of fun times with our new studio, with new people, with some new shows, some new live streams. If you've been enjoying some of those stuff that Bob and Aaron and I have been doing, like the Reachies or our movie review, where we're just in there, a couple people in person, it's going to be more of that all the time. Less just me in my bubble and more kind of group conversations, but again, still interacting with you and still interacting with, the chats, the super chats, the tips, because we really want to hear from you as well. Give Smith a raise from one dinner on KLC a month to every 2 weeks for that Pikachu. All right. John, how can you not like the dungeons get XP and already have levels? I know, John, right? Now the GMs get to level up too. Exactly. Yeah, KC, it's going to be a lot of fun. Listen, I'm going to be honest with you all. I'm going to be completely honest with you all. We have not played role-playing games in weeks, months, maybe like almost 2 months. Quest for the Frozen Flame ended. Our 5th edition campaign ended. We kind of waffled around what we wanted to play. We decided on Legend of the Five Rings. Session 0 took 2 sessions. Then Bob went to Disney. Then I went to Vegas. Then Bob was sick. Then Aaron had some family stuff to deal with. Then everything seemed, I was like, okay, we finally had a couple weeks, but the D&D movie's coming out. We have to see it. We should probably see it the day it comes out and do a live stream, because I think that'd be good for the channel. Okay, everybody's in agreement. Let's do that. And now it's like, okay, now it's back to Fridays when we play. Wait a second. Aaron's going to Disney. Now, Bob went to Disney. Now Aaron's going to Disney because, he's got a family too, and he's got to take them. Oh, Derek's taking his mom on a cruise. Okay, are those the same week? Of course they're not the same week. They're different weeks. So it's like, it's just been so problematic. Aaron and I are so excited just to get playing games, actual plays, in the studio with you all watching live, just so we can play games. Just so that I can get, Root or Avatar or Dungeon World or Monster Hearts, onto the table. I'm thirsty for these games, and I can't wait to play them. So, yeah. P.S. Is the new snack peck roll with the poo brown color supposed to be a reward? It's a kind of a reward, KC. It's not poo brown. It's called. I'm mostly colorblind. It looks like poo brown to me, so I will say that. But, look, it's the best thing that has happened to me on the channel, worth more than the Hero Point Awards. I can't tell if you're serious or not. I mean, I'm sure you're kind of trolling us a little bit, but all right. So Casey's also kind of, I'm not like horribly colorblind, but I'm a little red-green colorblind. So that maybe that's the gold, it's definitely poo brown to me as well. So we're on the same boat, Casey. All right, everybody. By the way, if you're like, what the hell are these people all talking about? This is all the stuff that happens in the KLC Discord. I don't know if you've been a part of other Discords, but number one, our Discord's not public. It's got a very low dollar amount to enter. That keeps the riffraff away. I'm not even going to kid you. The trash troll people who come in and just make everybody's lives miserable, no one's going to pay money for that. So they don't come in. We have a quality group. Secondly, I'm on there all the time. Like, we are talking to these people all the time. I am the number 2. I'm not even the number 1 because we have Ben, who's even more insane than me. I'm the number 2 person on my Discord. Aaron, my co-GM, is number 3. Our other co-host Bob, he's number 5. In terms of like most messages sent, we engage with our community pretty much 24/7. That is what being part of Knights of the Last Call is all about. It's about community. It's about learning from each other. It's about growing in our games and growing as people and using games as a medium to do that. So very proud of this community. I don't have kids, so it's like the only thing I have in terms of like a legacy that I can like look at and be like, wow, I created something and it's kind of awesome. And even though I created it, it's its own thing and it's grown on its own. And yeah, awesome. All right, awesome says they're moderately green and mild red colorblind too. Poo brown for sure. Awesome. Well, it's something like 35%, I think, of males are colorblind, at least within certain ethnicities. I think that's true. Oh, goo 8%. I thought it was higher than that. Okay, well, never mind. I thought it was like 30%. We are your children. Yeah, in a way. I mean, but the other thing about it is, and you all know this, like, it's not about me spouting some massive, master truth. I learned from, we've got some incredible people in our Discord, that, everybody has valuable things to say. There are some people who say a lot and say some really smart stuff, and I shut up and I listen and I try to learn from them as well. So, it's been a really great communal experience. I've learned more about how RPGs work and how RPGs interface over the last 2 years of running this channel than I did in probably the previous 10 playing these games, because you're exposed to such a small, limited cross section, mostly self-selected, so full of bias. And this is a great opportunity to sort of expand your palette, All right. Well, thank you everybody for the support. Thank you for hitting those goals. Thank you for joining us. And thank you again to all of our patrons for supporting this channel. Special shout out to our heroes, tier members who continue to, really hold it down. Big shout out to our champions who, of course, are going to be playing in Northern Reaches here shortly. Shout out to the Knights and the Squires for even, taking that big, huge step of just committing to being part of the community and paying any amount of money. It's a huge difference between somebody who just subscribes to a channel and someone who is a patron. So those are the real MVPs. There's 300 of us. That's like 292 because we always lose some people at the end of the month. But it's like 292 people, and very proud of that, and very proud of them. So if you're interested in joining, patreon.com/nightslastcall, link below. Otherwise, we'll see you Thursday, where if you want to learn about the most crazy, wild, random subsection of RPGs of all time, and you've always wondered what was on my bookshelves, join us Thursday as we continue to dig into the books. And we'll see you then on Knights of Last Call. Peace, everybody. Later.